Hey, everybody. Welcome. So glad to be with you here tonight. It should be yet another great late night conversation. So we're just going to do what we always do. So enjoy the show.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Hit the like. Oh, not going to say it. Got to break old habits. That's good. And relates to a lot about what we're going to talk about tonight. But anyhow, folks, I'm glad you're here with us tonight. The way we're going to do this stream is the way we do all of our streams, which is first I'll give my opening remarks and talk about what it is I plan to talk about, what's on my mind, the topic for this evening. Then after that, we will do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a Rumble rant on Rumble or a super chat on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, the best thing for you to do is to get on Rumble or get on YouTube and send me a super chat. I cannot answer questions from Facebook, but I can answer questions from Rumble and from YouTube. YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, right? Isn't that interesting how you mess with the syllables in words? It's Rumble instead of Rumble, right? It's Facebook instead of Facebook, or instead of Facebook, it's YouTube. Or I don't know. Is that a thing people do? Maybe I'm thinking about this too much. But anyway, folks, just an announcement before we get too far ahead of ourselves. We're doing morning messages with the Center for Political Innovation. Every morning, you can start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the CPI YouTube channel. And it's really, really awesome. It's a great way to start your morning with us. We've been having morning messages. We're getting that going again. And if you would like to make a morning message, we do. Not only can you watch one every morning, premieres at 6 a.m. from a different member, but on top of that, if you would like to make a morning message, we do have that option now as well. If you'd like to make a morning message, we have this link that was created by Peter Coffin, where you can just go to this link. You just go to the link and you click on it and you record it right there, or you upload the file that's in your phone already, and you can make a morning message yourself. It's group participation. So we've got that option as well. If you'd like to send in a morning message of your own, you can do that as well. And we accept different submissions. So, there are different ways of supporting and being part of the morning message effort. The reason we do the morning messages is we want to support each other. It is very hard to stay on the revolutionary road. And it's important that we're there for each other, giving people an optimistic, hopeful message, helping people to stay connected to the revolutionary movement while they start their day. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. That is the theme that we have used for the morning messages. So if you would like to, make one of your own, you can do that. And we got one that's coming up tomorrow morning, and you can watch it. And that's on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. And there's a lot of great stuff going on there. So thank you for that, everyone. So glad that we can do what we do. And quick reminder for folks that are coming in, the way these streams tend to work, I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions. We already got one question from John. He sent in, Scott Ritter. That's a great question. And that'll be the first one that I answer unless a Rumble rant comes in. We appreciate that. So yeah, if you got something for the second half of the show, after the roll call, after the opening remarks, send in a question, get me talking. We appreciate that. So I will jump into my opening remarks for tonight. I want to clarify a few things first. First things first, we are not leftists. We don't hate our country. We don't hate our fellow man. We don't want to bring instability to the country. We don't want to make things worse in the country. We're not out to destroy Christianity. We are not out to destroy the family. We don't want instability. We don't want chaos. We're not motivated by vengeance and a desire to destroy, to unleash our anger and unleash our sexual impulses. So in a way, we are not leftists. Leftism has deteriorated or degenerated into wokeism, and we are not that. We're city builders. We love our country. We love our community. We want to see strong families. We want to see the economic rejuvenation of the country, jobs for all, healthcare for all, education for all. So we're not leftists in the cultural and aesthetic sense, but we are socialists. We are definitely socialists in that we advocate a government of action that fights for working families. We want a society where the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power are organized to work in the interests of public good, not merely the interests of profit for a wealthy few who might own them. We think that the state does have an obligation to oversee economic growth and unleash human creativity. And we call for a government of action to fight for working families. And as socialists, we think that the main threat to America's working families is not Russia or Iran or Venezuela or Cuba. It is the ultra monopolies that run our government and that run our country, and that they are not patriots to the United States. They are not friends of the American people. Their gains come at our expense, and their defeats are victories for us. And that we fight for a new type of society here in the United States, where the government is actively working to create a better life for the people, where the state is no longer working for Jeff Bezos, but is rather kicking Jeff Bezos' ass to improve the lives of working people. We don't want a government that spends billions of dollars for a war while people right here in this country are struggling. We don't want a government that is overseeing the creation of a low-wage police state, when what we really need is new roads, new bridges, new highways, high-speed railway, education, jobs. That's what we need. We don't need prisons for profit. We don't need opioids, and we certainly don't need wars around the world. We advocate a society where the means of production and the centers of economic power, the natural wealth of the country, the banking system that controls credit, the industries that once made the heartland of this country prosperous. We advocated a society where those things are under popular control. And thus, we can oversee the rejuvenation and rebirth of this country into a prosperous society that cooperates with Russia, cooperates with China, cooperates with all the countries around the world to expand and grow as they expand and grow. We seek a new economic order beyond imperialism, where our economic gains can be their economic gains. Win-win cooperation. And the focus should be on growth and development. The focus should be on increasing living standards, increasing comfort, increasing life expectancy, increasing happiness. Human beings are not a cancer on the planet. Human beings are not a curse on Mother Earth. Human beings are a beautiful thing. Human beings have unprecedented creative power. And the duty of government is to unleash that creative power, not to get in the way, not to suppress it, and not to leave the people outcast and starving and hungry amid economic turmoil. The duty of the state is to mobilize people, to bring out the best in people, to help people be smarter and more creative, to help people be more productive, to help people think collectively in the interest of all of society rather than simply for short-term gain for themselves, right? We are the ultimate patriots. We are the ultimate believers in American freedom. We are the ultimate continuers of the American Revolution and the Second American Revolution, the Civil War to defeat slavery. What we believe is totally in line with Christianity. What we believe is totally in line with American patriotism. What we believe is totally in line with basic universal human values. We do, however, recognize that there are contending interests. And the interests of the ultra monopolies, Wall Street, the big banks, the big corporations, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies. What is in their interest is fundamentally not in the interest of the bulk of the American people, nor the people of the world. That we live in a world defined by an economic system called imperialism, and that system is collapsing. That system has no room for countries like China or Russia or Vietnam or Venezuela or Cuba or Iran to rise up from poverty. And so that system has to desperately fight against them and try to keep them in poverty so it can stay at the top of the hill. Furthermore, as a result of the computer revolution, that system has no room for you and me either. There's no place for us at the assembly line. And they want to degrow us, degrow our wages, decrease our living standards, etc. So many working families right now are looking at these prices and saying, how are we supposed to do it? The cost of living has gone up. You go to the grocery store, what you pay for a candy bar now, what you pay for a gallon of milk, it's ridiculous. And while the price of basic necessities has been rising, the price of housing has been rising even higher. The price of gas to get to work. I mean, we're just being gouged and squeezed. And you can work so hard and end up with nothing. You go to Walmart, you go to a gas station throughout the heartland of this country, you'll often find retired folks. People who worked all their life and should have their feet up. And they should be on the beach enjoying themselves. But the retirement pension that they've got is not enough to feed themselves. It's not enough to pay their bills. And so they're struggling and they're saying, I worked my whole life. What am I supposed to do? And you get younger people that say, I just want to do what a good American family would do. I want to get married. I want to have children. I want to provide a decent life for my kids. But instead, I'm drowning in student debt. Instead, the pay I'm getting is barely enough to make ends meet. I can barely afford to live on my own, let alone get married, let alone support a family. This is wrong. And of course, there's a devastating cultural crisis right now. Pornography everywhere, drugs everywhere, pessimism, demoralization everywhere. We are facing a big problem. But the way that I've come to learn to approach things is to understand that human beings as a species are moving toward perfection. And that moving toward perfection means constantly moving toward a higher mode of production, constantly learning to utilize our environment in a more effective way. And that when one mode of production becomes inefficient, you enter a civilization crisis, a society-wide crisis. And that necessitates the creation and the transition toward a higher mode of production. Hunter-gatherer civilization, it worked out pretty well for a long time, but then we got too good at it. We invented sticks and rocks to hunt with. We developed an understanding of how plants grew so we could figure out how to collect fruits and nuts more effectively. And pretty soon we got so good at hunting and gathering, and we got so good at collecting fruits and nuts, we got so good at it that there was a civilization crisis. There was a scarcity. People were starving, and that forced human beings to invent agriculture and start growing their own food, start domesticating animals, growing crops, right? And every so often, our human creativity and our ability to produce and interact with our environment, it reaches a point where it doesn't fit into the artificial restraints of the current mode of production. And when that happens, society enters a crisis. And the only way that crisis can be resolved is by moving to a higher mode of production. And right now, we are in such a moment. Computers, automation, artificial intelligence have moved human creativity to a new level. And as a result of that, we're in a civilization crisis. And this should be the best time in human history because never before has so little human labor been necessary. The fact that self-driving cars are just a few years away, that's a great thing. That should mean that all kinds of driving, the human chore called driving, is no longer necessary. But under our irrational mode of production, it's creating a crisis. Well, we need to transition to the kind of society where self-driving cars would be a great thing. We need to transition to the kind of society where poverty is not created by abundance, where abundance means greater wealth for all. Technological innovation means more comfort and more stability and more security and more wealth and happiness for all. We need to move toward a higher mode of production. And that is ultimately what needs to happen. And that is our worldview. And it's not unpatriotic. It's not anti-God, anti-Christian. It's very much in line with what I think every decent human being should want. But it goes against the interests of those who sit at the top of our current mode of production. The big bankers, the big monopolies, they don't want to give up their power. They don't want to see society organized in a different way because right now society is organized around making sure that money and endless amounts of it flow into their coffers. And so in order to change the world, that setup is going to have to change. And they are going to resist that change as much as they possibly can. And Russia and China and Venezuela and Iran and many countries have broken out of this imperialist system. And as a result of that, the big monopolies, the people that sit at the top of this international financial oligarchy, are looking for an all-out war against them. At the same time, they try to wage an all-out war against us to drive down our living standards, to get us to accept this new high-tech dark ages that fits in with their great advancement in terms of technology. We're in a period of great correction. And I'm confident that human beings will get through this, and our country will get through this. I think the United States will become what you might call a socialist society. We probably will not call it that because this is America, but we will become a society where homelessness is eradicated, where people are no longer without health care, where there's universal employment, and the labor of all and the natural wealth of all is utilized to ensure productivity and growth for all of society, where there is a rationally planned economy in order to make sure that human creativity and growth continues to march ahead. Right? We will get there. But the topic of my stream tonight is specifically aimed at those of us who have made it our mission and our life's work to see the United States get through this transition. And that's not everybody. It's actually very few, and it's always been very few. The amount of people who take up history's challenge and choose to live the lifestyle of a revolutionary is always a small number of people. And we have no shame about that, and we have no qualm with that. And we don't think we're superior just because we have taken up this task. In fact, we look at the masses of people as being the great heroes. The masses of people are the real heroes. We ourselves are often childish and ignorant, said Mao Zedong. But revolutionary organizations, they have three modes of existence. And tonight I'm going to talk about those modes of existence. But before I get to that, I want to talk about one of the saddest things. I have to just briefly touch on this. One of the saddest things, one of the saddest aspects of our time is that there are many people who seem to be attracted to these ideas. I seem to be very, very attracted to these concepts. Socialism, planned economy, aligning with Russia and China, opposing the big bankers, opposing their wars and police state. And they have no understanding of what it actually means to be a revolutionary. For them, this is all just kind of a form of passive internet entertainment. And you have to feel sorry for those people because it's not their fault. I'm lucky in that I became a communist long before social media existed. Not long before, but like right before it. I think my freshman year of college, Facebook was invented. And you had to have an email address that ended in .edu in order to have a Facebook. When I was young and got interested in communism, I didn't join a Facebook group. I didn't get on YouTube. I went and found actual communists. And they introduced me to an actual lifestyle of being a revolutionary, of selling newspapers on the street, of organizing rallies, of going to court with victims of police brutality, of marching the picket lines with labor unions, visiting prisoners. They introduced me to the lifestyle of one who is a revolutionary. However, there are many young people now who have no such conception. The idea that one would be an activist, one would be an organizer, is lost on them. For them, they see this simply as a form of internet entertainment. If you believe in these ideas, you tweet about them. Maybe you make videos about them. Maybe you write articles about them and share it with your friends. But the idea of being part of an organization that is actively going to the masses, people who are not looking for these ideas, people who are not predisposed to go looking for them on the internet, but actively seeking out the masses and trying to push them in a revolutionary direction and give guidance to the explosion that is coming, this is lost on them. They have no conception of what it is. And because of that, they act in a very erratic way because they don't know any better and they don't understand. And one of the ways in which, unfortunately, a lot of these internet revolutionaries act is they act very competitively because they don't understand that it's about building a real group or that one can actually get anything done. They just think it's about getting the most shares, getting the most likes, etc. And so they're quite frustrated. They often get quite frustrated. After you've been online doing revolutionary stuff long enough, like I have, you realize that the way the internet works is this. Certain people in various categories get promoted. Now, new categories are invented and, but for the most part, in certain categories, there are certain people that get boosted. And around such people, there generates fandoms. And if you are in such a category, and you are not one of those who gets boosted, it's very, very difficult to get any attention for yourself. And what happens is the fandoms mobilize their supporters to attack you, and the fandoms are, basically assigned to inoculate their audiences against you. And you can't beat the people that are being boosted because you are not at Twitter and you are not at Facebook. You are not in the Israeli government that tweets out about certain personalities. You are not in the Pentagon. You are not the owner of major TV companies and major outlets that promote these people that are assigned to own certain categories. And so you can't really fight back. And no matter what you say, you can have truth on your side. You can be right in the arguments you make. It doesn't matter, right? Because the fandoms develop around certain personalities who own certain categories, and they decide you're no good, and you get shut down. You get silenced. And it's very frustrating. And unfortunately, if you never really understand that actual revolutionary organizing is possible, if your only conception of this is as some kind of internet entertainment, internet fandom, you're going to be very, very demoralized very, very quickly. And you're going to give up. You're going to be sickened by the whole thing. But if you realize that the goal is not to build an internet fandom, the goal is to build an actual organization, then you can have hope and you can keep going. And one thing that I've noticed is that part of the reason I am so dedicated to building the Center for Political Innovation is because of the fact that when we freeze, when we stop doing things, that's when the toxicity of social media seeps into our circles. When we're focused, when we have a date for an event that we are building, when we have a project that we are working on, that's when we come alive. We're supporting each other, we're making plans, we're organizing. But when we stop, that's when the toxicity of the fandoms and the personal attacks and the rivalries and the demoralization seeps into our circles. And so part of the reason, I will say, it's a rather selfish reason, but it's a good motivation to have. Part of the reason that it's important that we remain in motion and that we constantly have goals and we constantly have something to work towards is because we need to keep away from the toxicity that dominates our circles on social media. I've said before, I hope someday these streams can be internal, that only members of our community will be able to watch them, and that our community will be so dedicated to meeting people in real life and so effective at recruiting people in real life that would join the community and then start watching them, that we don't have to compete in this online cesspool, that we actively are meeting people in communities. We're actively meeting people in neighborhoods, and we use these streams for what they're really for, which is holding our community together, giving orientation about the current political situation, giving motivation, sharing ideas, etc. That's what these streams serve for. But right now, because our community is still small and because we are becoming outreach oriented, but that's a transition, unfortunately, we have to exist in this cesspool, in this universe of toxic internet behavior that is very competitive, amid people who have no conception of what it even means to build a revolutionary organization. And that is a difficulty that we must face. And the way to press through is we have to constantly have organizational goals. We have to constantly have organizational goals. We have to constantly be trying to reach a new plane. We have to constantly be creating networks and interacting with each other. And that's why things like the morning messages are so important, because those morning messages, it's our community talking to our community. It's not our community arguing with the cesspool on the internet. It's our community that's engaged in the kind of work we do, talking with other members of our community and inspiring other members of our community. That's the idea. That's the idea. So this stream is not about building an internet fandom. And this stream is not about trying to get the most hits and the most shares and the most likes. This stream is about the lifestyle that I adopted when I was a teenager, that I got recruited to when I was a teenager, which is the lifestyle of being a revolutionary. The lifestyle of pushing your class forward, pushing working people to advance in the struggle for justice, and pushing forward toward ultimately transitioning toward the type of society that we need. So, because of that, tonight I am going to talk about 3 stages of revolutionary work. Because if you look at the way revolutionary organizations operate, if you look at the way that they operate, there are 3 different phases that you can divide them to. Now, no category like this is ever accurate, right? No category like this is ever complete, right? Within all 3 of these stages, there are different divisions and subdivisions, right? So these are just generalizations. But generally, if you look at the way revolutionary organizations operate, there are 3 conditions in which they can work. And these terms come from Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong wrote The Theory of Protracted People's War, about waging guerrilla warfare in the countryside. Obviously, that has nothing to do with what we're doing in the First World. But he divided the protracted people's war, the rural protracted people's war, into 3 categories, which is the strategic defensive, the strategic equilibrium, and the strategic offensive. And if one looks at a revolutionary situation or a revolutionary movement in any country, one will see a similar division. So let's go over the categories. First, you've got the strategic defensive. This is when the revolutionary organization struggles to exist and maintain a network of support in a hostile atmosphere. In a strategic defensive, the revolutionary organization is really just in a battle to simply exist. The society around them is completely hostile to them, and they are simply struggling to maintain a network of support and exist, teach their ideology, keep the group of people together, maybe recruit one person here or there, but largely the terrain is hostile. And that's called the strategic defensive. But then you have what's called the strategic equilibrium. And the strategic equilibrium is the phase in which conditions among the masses and divisions among the ruling class have intensified to the point that the revolutionary organization can exist and flourish as part of the political ecosystem. That among the masses, the conditions have gotten so bad that people are open to hear what the revolutionary movement has to say. They want to join the revolutionary movement. And on top of that, the divisions within the ruling class have gotten so intense that different factions will align with the revolutionary organization and will see the existence of the revolutionary organization as useful for their own reasons. And so, because of that, the masses are willing to join the revolutionary organization. Some within the power structure are willing to tolerate and even boost and promote the revolutionary organization to some degree for their own reasons. And so, because of that, the revolutionary organization becomes a part of society and it's able to exist. And then ultimately, you have the strategic offensive. And that is when the revolutionary organization moves toward becoming the government, taking power. And it does so at the center of a united front. Now, these three stages are all very dangerous. Right now, we are in strategic defensive. Communists in America have been in strategic defensive for quite some time. And I will talk more about that. But all of these stages are dangerous. They're all very dangerous. And the reason that they are dangerous is different in each situation. So I'm going to talk about all three of these periods, what they're like in different circumstances, different countries around the world, what they've been like. I'm going to give special attention to the United States and U.S. communist history because I think that's the most important because we're here in the United States. I'll probably talk about the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, etc. So it's first, and I wrote this whole textbook, right, Out of the Movement to the Masses, describing the history of the revolutionary movement in America. And if you read this book, you'll understand what I'm getting at. So the first phase, which is the phase that we are in right now in the United States, is what you call strategic defensive. And that is that we're struggling to exist, that revolutionary organizations are struggling to exist in hostile terrain. Conditions are changing, and I think we are eventually going to be reaching strategic equilibrium, but we're not there yet. And strategic defensive is a very hard time. Now, in Lenin's book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, he described it this way. This is how he described the years of reaction following the defeat of the 1905 revolution in Russia. He said, all the revolutionary and opposition parties were smashed. Depression, demoralization, splits, discord, defection, and pornography took the place of politics. Now, what is he talking about there? Well, when revolutionary organizations have been smashed and they're existing only in the margins, under such circumstances, people don't see the necessity for unity. Why stay together? You're not accomplishing anything. People want to be unified when they think they can accomplish something. But when you're not accomplishing anything, why stay in the same organization? Why continue working together? And that's splits and discord. People blaming each other for the results of the bad circumstances. They look at the bad circumstances and then, well, if only you had done blank. Well, if only you had done blank, right? Demoralization. People just saying, screw this. I don't want to live this way anymore. I'm going back to living biologically. I'm going back to just being part of the non-politicized sections of society. Defection. People just saying, look, I'm out of here. I'm not seeing any victories. I don't see a reason to keep going with this. And of course, pornography. Right? Obsession with gender and sexual politics. Kind of a fixation on things below the belt. This is all the result of what happens in a period of strategic defensive, because people can't see real victories. And unfortunately, because of the conditions in the United States, we've been in this mode really since the 1950s. Some people might find it shocking. They say, well, what about the 1960s, Caleb? Well, I'm telling you, the 1960s, there was an upsurge of political activism, but it could not translate into organizations that really had a base among the population. There was an attempt, the 1970s new communist movement was an attempt to build a base among the population, an attempt to maybe move towards strategic equilibrium, but they couldn't. The conditions were not ripe. And, the Black Panthers, they had some base for a while, but they were forcibly broken up by the state. And they were not able to sustain it long enough to become strategic equilibrium, to become a permanent force. And that strategic defensive is a very depressing time to exist. And really, during the time of strategic defensive, the only people who are communists are those who are attracted to it for very spiritual reasons. Those who really do believe in the cause and are willing to keep working for it and keep sacrificing for it, even if they don't see any payout, even if they don't see any result. And some of those people are the most heroic people you will ever meet. I heard the story of, when I first joined the Workers' World Party, they took me up to Buffalo, New York, and I sat in the living room of a woman in her 80s. And she got out the photo album. And we looked at the pictures of the 1950s, the bad old days. And she talked about how she was a teacher and how in Buffalo, all the steel workers who were members of the Communist Party were fired. So they had a protest at the steel mill saying steel workers have the right to join whatever political party they want, Democrat, Republican, or Communist. And after she went to that protest, a couple days later, she was in school teaching the kindergartners or first graders, whoever. The FBI showed up at her school. She was called down to the principal's office. There were 2 FBI men there. They had a photograph of her, and they said, "Is this you at this communist rally?" And she said, "Yes, that's me." And they said, "You're fired." A few months later, she got a job teaching in another elementary school. Same thing happened. And eventually, she had to get a job at a phone company, at a telephone company, AT&T. The FBI showed up at the telephone company. She got called into the boss's office, 2 FBI men there. "This woman's a communist." And the guy at the telephone company said, "Are you talking about communism on the phone with anybody?" She said, "No." They said, "Are you trying to recruit your coworkers here at the telephone company to be communists?" And she said, "Nope." And they said, "Well, as long as you don't do that, we don't care." She got to keep her job at the telephone company. That's what our comrades went through. And don't think that in times of strategic defensive, you can't do important work. And that's an illusion. That's an excuse that people make. They say, "Look, these are not revolutionary times. There's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do." And that's a lie. During the Korean War in the United States, the Communist Party had been smashed and was outlawed. And they had heroic demonstrations against the Korean War. And I talk about them in this book, right? Go and read in chapter 1 the heroic rallies they had against the Korean War. An older woman I knew who was a nurse, her family were in the Communist Party. She was in nursing school during the Korean War. And somebody came up to her at nursing school, somebody that she knew who was involved in communism, and they said, "Be in Times Square at a certain time." She took the hint. They didn't tell her what was going to happen, but she took the hint. So at that time, she went to Times Square, and there were a bunch of people, mostly men in suits and ties, just standing around, not saying nothing. Not saying nothing, just standing around. And then somebody gave a code word. And then all of a sudden they unfurled a banner that said, "U.S. troops out of the Korean Peninsula." And they unfurled this banner, this huge banner, "U.S. troops out of the Korean Peninsula." And immediately the police came and clubbed them and started trying to rip the banner up. So they rolled up the banner and they ran. And they got down to 34th Street, Madison Square. Same thing, standing around, quiet. Somebody gave the code word, they unfurled the banner, and they did it again. In this book, I quote Howard Fast talking about how they rented a hotel room facing Times Square in New York City. And they recorded a vinyl record of a speech opposing the Korean War. And they got big speakers. And they put it on a timer. And they put the big speakers in the window. And they had the vinyl record of the speech. And they locked the door of the hotel room. And they glued the keyhole shut. And they ran. And they ran. And then the speech blasted out into Times Square, an anti-imperialist revolutionary speech supporting the communist leaders who were in prison, opposing racism and Jim Crow segregation, supporting the Korean people and Kim Il-sung, blasted into Times Square until the police were finally able to figure out what hotel room it was coming from, break into the room, and turn off the vinyl record. So don't think that just because you're in a period of demoralization or a period of strategic defensive when the masses aren't ready for it, that you can't do amazing things. The execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal was stopped in the 1990s in a time of very low political prospects, in a time of strategic defensive. The Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War protest movement was carried out in an atmosphere of strategic defensive. So just because you're in strategic defensive doesn't mean you can't do amazing things. But it means that the payout of what you do is going to be very limited. And that the temptation to deviate from what you should be doing in order to get results is going to be there. People are saying, look, we're doing the right thing and it's not working. Maybe we ought to do something else. And people are going to say, hey, we're doing the right thing and it's not working. Maybe we ought to do something else. During periods of strategic defensive, when the masses are not ready to hear it, when you're not getting the results you expect, this is when people become left adventurists, terrorists. Because if you blow something up, something happens. And this is also when people become reformists and sellouts. They join the Democratic Party. They join the labor union bureaucracy. They start a nonprofit funded by George Soros. They get a job at a university teaching students about white mansplaining privilege or whatever. Why? Because that gives them results. Actually staying on the revolutionary road in a time when the masses aren't ready for it, when the masses aren't able to resonate and hear your message, is very difficult, and it doesn't have the reward that one would expect. And if you're in this for a reward, you're going to go elsewhere. You're going to become an adventurous terrorist and become a martyr and feel like, I went to prison for doing this revolutionary thing. I'm a martyr. Well, actually, you didn't really help the situation. Or become a revisionist, become a reformist, think, I'm making a difference. No, you're just helping reinforce and stabilize the system that existed. You're not really helping, but you want to feel like you're accomplishing something. It's very hard to maintain revolutionary cadre in a period of strategic defensive. And that is why I take my hat off to anyone who stays on the revolutionary road. But at the same time, we should acknowledge that being in an atmosphere of defeat, in an atmosphere of isolation from the masses, can make revolutionary organizations weary. I'll never forget years ago, I went to a memorial for a communist activist that I knew. And at this memorial, there were 4 or 5 communist activists who'd been in Cleveland. And I had a great time at this memorial because it was a reunion of all these great revolutionary people who'd known the person who died. But they had these smug looks on their faces. And every single person in the room had committed some unforgivable crime over the course of the last 50 years. This person had gotten drunk on the bus. This person had quit the party because they got in a fight with so-and-so, and they had some grudge, some unforgivable grievance, some bitterness toward every person in the room. And it broke my heart to see. Because we were all here to mourn the loss of a great revolutionary woman, a great revolutionary teacher who had died. But for them, the years and years of demoralization, the years and years of setbacks and defeat had worn them down. And these 4 or 5 comrades, they were the most dedicated people. They were the ones who didn't leave the revolutionary movement when so many others had. They didn't sell out and become labor union bureaucrats. They didn't become left adventurists. They didn't just go back to living biologically. They had stuck it out. And because they had stuck it out, they had a resentment against those who hadn't. And they developed kind of an insular mindset. It's us against the world. It's us against the world. The world is against us. Screw them. And it was very hard, I noticed when I was organizing with them in Cleveland, to let them accept anybody. When I joined, my initiation into the group was they accused me of racism. Groundlessly, just to test me. They accused me of racism when they knew I wasn't a racist. Just to see if I would take it. To see if I had the submissiveness to endure the revolutionary organization's discipline. And that most of the younger people that I tried to bring into the revolutionary organization, they couldn't deal with it. The verbal abuse that went on in the organization, people cursing you out, people accusing you of this, accusing you of that. The demoralization atmosphere that had been created in this revolutionary group made it very unattractive to most people. I was there because I was committed to these ideas, but I can see why a lot of people could see this organization, the way they treated each other, and the attitude that they had, and they wanted to go elsewhere. And that wasn't their fault. It was the result of years of demoralization, years of isolation from the masses, years of setbacks, going out and working really, really hard and not seeing the results that you hope for. And so a period of strategic defensive is a very, very hard time. And during the period of strategic defensive, the main thing that the revolutionary organization is trying to do is stay intact. Stay intact, keep their eyes on the prize, not become left adventurous terrorists and criminals, not become revisionists and reformists and people that just help reinforce the system that exists, but keep their eye on the revolutionary road. It is very difficult to maintain the lifestyle of a revolutionary during the period of strategic defensive. And that is why I'm very happy about the fact that we are approaching strategic equilibrium in the United States. In the next 2 or 3 years, we will probably be in strategic equilibrium. But we're not ready for it. We're nowhere near ready for it. And if strategic equilibrium happened today, we would fall apart. We wouldn't even know what to do. All right, strategic equilibrium is very, very close at this point. I can smell it, and you can smell it. It's on the horizon. The conditions among the masses have gotten worse. The interest in socialist and revolutionary ideas is larger than ever before. Russia and China are rising. U.S. society is collapsing. The woke fake left has discredited itself among the masses. The right wing doesn't have any real answers except free markets and hate immigrants. People are ready for this. People are ready for strategic equilibrium. But if we're not ready when the moment arises, if we don't have the correct organizational apparatus in place, the moment will be lost. We will be completely taken by surprise. And the ruling class knows this. The ruling class knows this, and that's why the main target right now of the American government is the Uhuru movement. The Uhuru movement is more prepared than any other revolutionary anti-imperialist organization in this country for strategic equilibrium. There is not a single revolutionary organization in America that comes anywhere close to the People's Democratic Uhuru movement in terms of preparation for strategic equilibrium. Nobody comes close. You look at the situation, you say it doesn't make any sense, right? There's all kinds of people that are sympathetic with Russia and Ukraine. Right? There's all kinds of people that are sympathetic. They got Scott Ritter who's sympathetic. They got Caleb who's sympathetic. They got this guy, that guy, this group, that group. Why did they go after the People's Democratic Uhuru movement? I'll tell you why they went after them. Because in St. Louis, Missouri, in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida, they are ready for a strategic equilibrium. They've got a farmer's market. They've got classes for pregnant mothers. They've got community basketball courts. They've got sections of the Black community that take leadership from them and receive services from them. And if conditions intensified in at least two key areas, the masses will fall under their leadership. And that terrifies the ruling class. And the ruling class wants to make sure that if the crisis comes, they don't solidify themselves among the Black community in the way that they very easily could. I'm going to show the video on the Uhuru movement because in the context of this conversation, it's very important to understand. I want you to understand this. The Uhuru movement, unlike any other organization, forget about what you think of their political line, etc. They are in a position that if strategic equilibrium came, their strength would astronomically explode, exponentially explode.
After the rioting was done, U.S. media kind of forgot about those communities. Well, Uhuru, they went out there because they saw Black and brown people like themselves that were out there protesting and rioting, and they stayed there. And they've been there since 2014, providing services in the community, giving these young people in the community something constructive to do, not just go out and break shit to raise awareness about the conditions they're in, but ways to actually feed people and serve the community. And they've been there in St. Louis since 2014 doing constructive work. They have really escalated these programs. They have a farmer's market. They provide classes and services to pregnant mothers, and in particular in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida. They're trying to undo the damage that the U.S. Department of Justice and the state police and the local police and all the forces have been doing in communities like Ferguson, Missouri. And at the same time that they've done this community work, the African People's Socialist Party has also taken a firm anti-imperialist stance. They support China. They support Russia. They support Cuba. They support Iran. And when the United States started piling weapons into Kiev, they defended Russia's right to intervene.
This defensive war in Ukraine that Russia is actually waging against world colonial powers, not Ukraine as a single entity, but the U.S. and all colonial powers who have an interest in colonially dominating African people right here in this country and around the world and extracting resources from the majority of peoples on the planet. That system, this current system, is in severe crisis and they cannot rule in the same old way.
Because of that, their homes were raided. Then months later, the federal government came out with an indictment, and it's charging them with being Russian agents. And it's trying to allege that the election campaign that they ran in St. Petersburg, Florida, was somehow interference in the U.S. electoral process.
4 activists associated with the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement and the African People's Socialist Party have been indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice. The indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice accuses them of spreading Russian propaganda and cites simply some web conferences that they had, some Zoom meetings, some emails they sent out, as well as the fact that they have run routine election campaigns. Is this of concern to the Secretary General as an attack on human rights, freedom of assembly, etc.?
I frankly was not aware of the case before you mentioned it. Let me look into it and I will get back to you.
What's going on in Africa is directly connected to what's going on here. What's going on in Ukraine is connected to what's going on in Harlem. You know what I'm saying? It's an international global economy that's all connected.
Because they go to conferences in Russia, this constitutes Russian meddling in the elections. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's completely, utterly ridiculous. They've been running these campaigns for years, since before I was born. Back in the 1970s, they were running people for office. Their platform of reparations, I mean, Marianne Williamson, she's a major Democrat candidate. She also says she believes in reparations. I mean, it's not a unique message that they have in that sense, but they have been targeted because they're doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, you know, at all of our meetings, we have a picture of Fred Hampton up on the stage because Fred Hampton, he built a free breakfast program. He organized what he called a rainbow coalition, uniting low-income people, white, black, brown, Arab, Latino into one organization, trying to build up community empowerment, trying to do community service projects while teaching Marxism and socialism. We look at Fred Hampton as a great example of the American revolutionary tradition. And, the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, they don't like that we wave the American flag. They don't like that we consider ourselves patriotic. They have their own kind of unique analysis. They talk about what they call the colonial mode of production. That's not traditional Marxist thinking. And we don't agree with them on a number of issues, but it doesn't matter. We support them.
We all have to stand up and oppose the ideology of division and support an ideology of unity based upon our material interests, to work together.
People who can't understand that, people who can't get past, this or that, we got to put aside our differences and say that if they come for them, they come for all of us. If they go after them, they got to deal with all of us. That needs to be the attitude among anti-imperialists.
Yeah. And that's why, the People's Democratic Uhuru movement has been targeted, because they, more than any other organization in the United States, are prepared for strategic equilibrium. Conditions of strategic equilibrium are such that the divisions within the ruling class and the conditions among the masses have intensified to the point that the revolutionary organization can exist and flourish. The last time that we were in what you might call strategic equilibrium in the United States was during the 1930s. During the 1930s, there was a Great Depression in the United States. People were literally starving on the streets. And the Communist Party built the unemployment councils. And the Communist Party built the industrial unions. And on top of that, there were divisions among the ruling class. And Roosevelt and his faction was at odds with the National Association of Manufacturers and Henry Ford. Roosevelt was aligned with the Rockefellers and with the British bankers, the oil monopolies, and with Wall Street, whereas Hitler and fascism was aligned with the National Association of Manufacturers, the industrialists, and with Henry Ford. And because of that, Roosevelt worked very, very hard to befriend the Communist Party. He enabled the Communist Party to exist. He supported the sit-down strikes that they waged in order to occupy their factories. He met with communist leaders at the White House because he saw them as having his back against fascism. There was an attempted fascist coup against Roosevelt in 1933. It was called the Business Plot. And so the divisions among the ruling class created a situation where Roosevelt wanted the Communist Party to exist because he needed a revolutionary organization in the streets that would have his back against fascism. And the conditions among the masses were so bad, people were literally starving to death, that they had no choice but to join the mobilizations that the Communist Party built, the unemployment councils, etc. And in every major city in this country, for the most part, you saw a significant Communist Party organization existing in New York City, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in Pittsburgh, in Cleveland, in Philadelphia. The Communist Party built up support. And in certain ethnic communities, it was even stronger. Among the Black community, support for the Communist Party was very massive because they talked about Jim Crow segregation and because the Soviet Union called out America for its racism. Langston Hughes, the famous African-American poet, joined the Communist Party. Paul Robeson joined the Communist Party. And almost all of the important leaders of the Black community were friendly or had a relationship with the Communist Party because the Communist Party was the organization that fought for their rights and represented them within the wider Roosevelt coalition. And a big part of Roosevelt's coalition was the Dixiecrats, the segregationists. But because the Communist Party was so important, Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, went out of her way to speak up for Black people and have Black singers perform on the National Mall. And she spoke up about the Scottsboro Nine and other cases. And that the Communist Party was able, because of the conditions among the masses and because of the divisions in the ruling class, to be part of the political ecosystem. They were not ever on the brink of taking power, but they were able to exist. And, you can think about an example of this in the revolutionary history of many countries. And I want to emphasize that all of these phases are dangerous. Right? Strategic defensive is dangerous because your organization might just fall apart because it's so hard to keep going. But strategic equilibrium is dangerous because if you're in strategic equilibrium for too long, it becomes stale. And you get afraid to take risks. And you get too comfortable. And this is the story of many revolutionary organizations. They've been allowed to exist. They've been allowed to flourish. They're legal. They have seats in parliament. They have thousands or millions of members, and suddenly they lose their umph. After a decade, after 2 decades, they lose their umph. And then when a crisis emerges where they could actually go into strategic offensive, they can't do it. A great example is the French Communist Party. 1968, France was in a revolutionary crisis. And the French Communist Party had been in strategic equilibrium since the end of the Second World War, even before the Second World War. And the crisis of May of 1968 came, and they could not snap out of it. There was too much risk involved. They didn't want a civil war. They didn't want to go to jail. They didn't want to lose all that they had. They weren't going to go all in. It's like gambling, right? You go all in. And in a revolutionary crisis, you have to go all in. And they were not willing to go all in. And so the revolutionary crisis failed. And since then, the French Communist Party has only gotten worse. It's become a straight up pro-imperialist party at this point. It's a party that has become Euro-communists, a party that supports the Ukrainian fascists. You know, they're no longer a revolutionary organization. 1968, they were still a revolutionary organization, but they were a revolutionary organization that had gotten stuck in strategic equilibrium. They'd gotten too comfortable in strategic equilibrium, and they'd lost their energy. The same for the Italian Communist Party. And there's many examples of organizations that are allowed to exist, and they get too comfortable in this position of existing within the system, and their ultimate goal of overthrowing capitalism vanishes, and they become a fixture of the political ecosystem. All right? It's important to flourish as part of the political ecosystem during the period of strategic equilibrium. But if you just do it for too long, and you just exist in this state of being for too long, eventually you become stale. And this is a great example of, CPUSA has never, they have not been in strategic equilibrium since the 30s, since the 50s and McCarthyism. They've been on strategic defensive. But yeah, strategic equilibrium is dangerous because you can lose your way. You can get lost. And that's important. Now, strategic, before I move on from strategic equilibrium, I want to give you an example of, this is from Vladimir Lenin's essay or lecture on the 1905 revolution, where he describes what it's like when an organization enters a period of strategic equilibrium, when they suddenly become part of existing. This is Lenin talking about how in the lead up to the 1905 revolution in Russia, things changed. He says the word striker acquired an entirely new meaning among the peasants. It signified a rebel, a revolutionary, a term previously expressed by the word student. But the student belonged to the middle class, the learned, to the gentry, and was therefore alien to the people. But the striker, on the other hand, was of the people. He belonged to the exploited class. Deported from St. Petersburg, he often returned to the village where he told his fellow villagers of the conflagration that was spreading among the cities and would destroy the capitalists and the nobility. A new type appeared in the Russian village, a class-conscious young peasant. He associated with strikers. He read newspapers, and he spoke to peasants about the events in the cities. And he explained to his fellow villagers the meaning of political demands, and he urged them to fight the landowning nobility. So previously, to be a revolutionary meant in Russian society meant you were a student, meant you were an intellectual. But in the lead up to the 1905 revolution, as they began to approach strategic equilibrium, as they suddenly became an entity that was able to exist, suddenly the masses started to associate revolutionaries with people just like them, people in their neighborhoods, people in their communities. Class-conscious young peasants. There were people in their lives who they knew to be revolutionaries. Revolutionary ideas were there in their communities. And this is what he's describing. And this is the beginning of what strategic equilibrium looks like. People don't see revolutionary activists and communist organizers as some obscure thing. They don't see them as some college kid, some student. They don't see them as some obscure, political weirdo. They see them as somebody in their neighborhood that they know, someone in their community that they know. That's what they see it as. People that are involved in the revolutionary movement, that are in revolutionary organizations, are in their communities, in their neighborhoods. This is what he's describing, right? In the lead up to the 1905 revolution, right? This is what strategic equilibrium looks like. It means that people that are ordinary people in Kansas and Idaho and Pennsylvania and Texas, people, normal, everyday people, know communist revolutionaries and identify with them and don't see them as alien or foreign, but see them as people they can relate to and people they can understand. That's what strategic equilibrium looks like. Strategic equilibrium is not about Greenwich Village politics. Strategic equilibrium is when socialism and communism are selling in Peoria, as they say, right? That's the old expression. Does it sell in Peoria, right? Peoria, Illinois was considered this most wholesome conservative neighborhood. Well, strategic equilibrium is a time where communism sells in Peoria, right? All right, let me see if I can find is, does it sell in Peoria? Does it sell in Peoria? Will it play in Peoria? Is an American English figure of speech used to ask whether a given product, person, or promotional theme or event will appeal to the mainstream of the United States. All right, look this up. Does it play in Peoria, or does it sell in Peoria? Will it play in Peoria? That's an expression they use in the advertising world and entertainment. Will mainstream America be able to accept it? Does it play in Peoria, after Peoria, Illinois? Strategic equilibrium is when communism plays in Peoria. That's what strategic equilibrium is. It's when it plays in Peoria. And what Lenin describes in this passage I just read to you is it was playing in Peoria. In little tiny villages, people all knew a striker. People all knew a revolutionary, the class-conscious young peasant. That is what strategic equilibrium looks like. And we should all be envisioning strategic equilibrium right now, because it's very close, but we might not be ready for it. And if we're not ready for it when it comes, that's very bad. But anyhow, let's get to the last part. Strategic offensive. Strategic offensive is where the revolutionary organization moves toward taking power, positioning itself at the center of a united front. Generally, in a revolutionary crisis, there is a very big division in society. There's a question that cannot be avoided. There's already been divisions in the ruling class and strategic equilibrium, but this is when the question becomes so big it cannot be avoided. And then, under such circumstances, the huge revolutionary organization positions itself on one side of the polarization, and they become the government because of their position. Great example, Russian Revolution. What was the issue? The issue was the war. It was World War I. The bulk of the Russian population did not want to fight in World War I any longer. However, the bulk of the ruling class did want to fight in World War I. There was a division, and the lower level capitalists who did business with Germany, they didn't want to fight in World War I. The peasantry didn't want to fight in World War I. The working class didn't want to fight in World War I. But the aristocracy did, but some of the wealthier capitalists did. And the Bolsheviks became known as the anti-war guys. And they led the strikes, July days, down with war. They were the party that was against the war. And Russian society was divided. Are you for the war or are you against it? And the Bolsheviks were the party that said, end the war now. Peace, land, and bread. And they had a huge organization of thousands of people, and everyone who wanted to end the war aligned themselves with the Bolsheviks because the Bolsheviks were the anti-war guys. And eventually they stormed the Winter Palace and declared themselves the government because they were the guys who could deliver on opposing the war. And if you look at a revolutionary crisis, that's generally what happens. There's a massive revolutionary organization that exists, that has a huge base of support, that has sections of the military, maybe its own military, its own militias. It's a huge section of society, a huge section of the state and of the government, huge sections of territory. And there is a question that cannot be avoided, and they are on one side of it. And the clash over that question becomes unavoidable, and they're on one side of it, and by being on one side of that clash, they force themselves into power. That's generally how revolutions happen. The united front is the group of people who are around them because they are on one side of a massive polarization. In most of the countries in the world that have adopted socialist governments, it's been the question of fascism. The communists were the anti-fascist fighters in Romania, in Czechoslovakia, in Lithuania, in Bulgaria, in Yugoslavia, in Albania, the overwhelming majority of the countries where communists have come to power. There has been a fascist invasion. There has been a section of the government that has supported the fascists, usually the nobility, the king or a feudal aristocrat class that supported the fascist invaders. And the communists were against the fascists from the beginning. They were organizing against the fascists, and they were the main force of anti-fascism. They had the military that was against fascism. They had the organizations that were against fascism, and anyone who was on the anti-fascist side found themselves marching behind the communists. And so when the fascists were driven out, the communists became the new government. North Korea is a similar situation, except it wasn't fascism, it was Japanese colonialism. If you were living in the northern half of the Korean peninsula, the question was, are we going to fight the Japanese colonizers or not? Well, the communists, who had funding from the Soviet Union and had funding from and base areas in China, the communists who had this massive revolutionary anti-Japanese army, the communists that were well organized and had community groups, they were the main people fighting Japan. So if you were fighting against Japan, one way or another, you ended up marching behind the communists because they were the ones that were on the right side. You ended up being in a united front against the Japanese invaders. And so when the Japanese invaders got the boot in the northern half of the Korean peninsula, the communists became the government. And there was originally only Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was originally the only communist on the ruling council of the government of North Korea. And his two closest assistants were Christian ministers, because Christians had been the other main group that had fought the Japanese invaders. It was Christians and communists who fought the Japanese invaders, right? The Japanese occupiers of Korea, they wanted to force Shintoism, an ancestor worship, onto the people. They ruled in the name of Asian identity. But the communists were atheists and were anti-colonial and inspired by the Soviet Union. And the Christians were largely sympathetic to the West, Britain and America. And so the two of them were both against the Japanese occupiers. And it was Christians and communists who teamed up to fight against the Japanese colonizers. And in Northern Korea, the communists were the biggest force, and they became the government after the fall of after the driving out of the Japanese invaders. And that's very important. And what's interesting is that all three of these moments, all three of these periods in which revolutionary organizations exist, require different tactics. In a period of strategic defensive, you're just holding the group together. If the group can exist, if the group can bring in new people and recruit people and teach them, that's a miracle in a period of strategic defensive. And in a period of strategic defensive, you're struggling to keep people inspired. You're struggling to keep people believing we can win. You're struggling to keep people from just giving up and going home. In a period of strategic equilibrium, you're struggling to make sure you don't get stuck in a rut. You're struggling to make sure you don't lose the original purpose. You don't just kind of become a functionary of the existing system. In a period of strategic equilibrium, you're struggling to not become content with just keeping what you already have, but maintain your eyes on the prize. And you're struggling to maintain your political alliances while staying true to your principles. And in the period of strategic offensive, and that's a period where you're risking your very life. In a period of strategic offensive, if you win, you become the new government. But if you lose, you die. In a period of strategic offensive, when you're on the brink of taking power, the stakes are very, very, very high. The period of strategic offensive, it's very interesting, is the period where you're on the brink of taking power. But oddly, the period of strategic offensive is probably the period in which the revolutionary movement puts forward the most modest sounding ideas. It's actually very interesting. When you're weak, you sound radical. During the period of strategic defensive, your job is to hold that group together. You're not going to grow. You're not going to expand. Most of the masses don't want to hear what you have to say. So your job is to keep the fire burning within your organization. So that's why a lot of the communist groups in America that still exist are fucking crazy, because that's the only reason any of them stick around. During strategic defensive, you're not going to win over the masses of people. They're never going to listen to you. They don't want to hear what you have to say. So you got to focus on being ultra revolutionary. You got to focus on being the most radical sounding, the most extreme, because that'll keep the people that are already won there. That'll keep them going. You don't want them to get bored. You don't want them to get burned out. So during the period of strategic defensive, that's when groups are pretty wacky, and they can act pretty wacky because there's no consequences for acting wacky, because you're not going to grow anyway. Right. And that's the funny thing, right? You know, often reformists and sellouts will say, well, it's not a revolutionary situation, so we've got to act. We got to tone everything down. No, in a period where the masses are not going to listen to you, if you want to keep your group together, you got to be as wacky as you possibly can. You got to be as fired up and extreme, and because you're not going to win over the masses anyway. You've got nothing to lose. You need to keep that spiritual power going in hostile circumstances in order to hold your group together. But when you enter strategic equilibrium, then you can start toning things down, because now you can actually sink roots into the masses. Now you can actually win people over. You can actually win people over during strategic equilibrium. But if you don't win them over to anything, you're not doing your job. During strategic during the strategic defensive, the focus is on keeping the group together. That's all you can do. When you transition to strategic equilibrium, the focus is on sinking your roots into the masses of people. And it's not about recruiting people. It's about infrastructure. It's about creating farmers markets. It's about creating community centers. It's about creating labor unions. It's about creating an apparatus of political infrastructure that you sit at the center of. In strategic equilibrium, it's about sinking your roots into the masses of people as deeply as you possibly can, with kindergartens and choirs and marching bands and labor unions and unemployment associations and any possible group, any possible way you can be influencing the masses of people and pushing the revolutionary line. That's strategic equilibrium. And the period of strategic offensive is about reinforcing the polarization. There's the question that is on everyone's mind. Are you for the fascists or are you for the anti-fascists? Are you for continuing World War I? Are you for opposing it? And in the strategic offensive, the revolutionary organization forces that question to the front at all times, because they know that anyone who lines up on the anti-fascist side is going to end up under the communist leadership. Anyone who lines up in the anti-war side is going to line up under the communist leadership. So the strategic defensive is a period where the revolutionary organization focuses on keeping its spiritual energy. The strategic equilibrium is the period where the revolutionary organization focuses on building up its infrastructure and sinking its roots among the masses. And the period of strategic offensive is the period in which the revolutionary organization focuses on reinforcing and escalating the polarization question that will ultimately lead to the communists taking power and the United Front. The way you operate under all these conditions is very different. But all of these conditions are dangerous. All of these conditions are very, very dangerous, because if they last too long and they become stale, it hurts the revolutionary organization. And the communists in America have been in strategic defensive for way too long. We have been in strategic defensive since the 50s. In the 70s, the 1970s, the new communist movement tried their hardest to get towards some kind of strategic equilibrium. And it was very noble, but they just couldn't do it because the conditions were not as such. And if you read, chapter 3 of this book, Where is America Going? Or I'm sorry, Out of the Movement to the Masses, you'll read a very tragic chapter 3 about how they tried. They really, really tried, but they were unable to do so. And if you read chapter 1 about the Communist Party, you will read about an organization that did become a real, solid, anti-imperialist group with a mass base, but a group that ultimately was crushed by McCarthyism and then was devastated by Khrushchev's secret speech. And if you read chapter 2 about Sam Marcy and the global class war tendency, you will read about an organization that existed in the period of strategic defensive, but was able to carry out a number of very effective anti-imperialist operations, despite its isolation from the masses. And that because its leader, Sam Marcy, had been a member of the Communist Party during the 1930s, a group that always aspired to reach strategic equilibrium on some level, even though they kind of lost it. The leader, Sam Marcy, he knew what strategic equilibrium was like. He had come to his political development. He'd come of age politically in a time when the Communist Party was in a state of strategic equilibrium, and he understood that. And the Workers' World Party kept kind of a perspective of maintaining the goal of someday being in strategic equilibrium because their founder had lived under it and he'd seen it firsthand. So you'll read about all these things, but now I want to bring us to where we are at this very, very moment, which is that we are in the period where we could come out of strategic defensive. We could actually see strategic equilibrium. The divisions in the ruling class are intense enough. The conditions among the masses are getting worse every day. And within the next several years, it is very possible that we could have strategic equilibrium. The conditions would be as such that a revolutionary anti-imperialist organization would be able to flourish in most major cities of the United States and sink its roots among the masses. That because the lower level capitalists are under such attack from Joe Biden, and because the forces that don't want all-out World War III with Russia and China are under such attack from the ultra monopolies, that they will allow us to exist. They'll have to allow us to exist as a mechanism for protecting them from the efforts of the big monopolies to crush them. And the masses will be very receptive to us existing because their conditions will deteriorate so much they will need us to lead them in struggles. They will need us to care for them, to provide them with food, to do community work, etc. I think that time is very, very close. Strategic equilibrium is coming much closer than you think. But we have to be ready. We have to be ready for it. And one of the main things we need to do is we need to solidify our network. We need to bring more people into our network, and we need to solidify it. And the internet is the biggest distraction, and it is the biggest sower of discord and disillusionment that exists. I will be completely honest with you. One of the biggest problem facing our movement right now, as we are in still a period of strategic defensive, but we are approaching the possibility of strategic equilibrium. The biggest problem, I would say, is that people who become attracted to our ideas, they don't find comrades. They don't become part of a network. Instead, they get stuck in a very demoralizing, pessimistic, competitive, mudslinging shit show. And they do that for a while, and they're part of one of these fandoms, and then they change the channel. And you know these people. For a while, they're a Trotskyist. Then they're a Maoist. Then they're a Buddhist. Then they're a Shia Muslim. Then they're a Russian Orthodox bro. Then they are into karate. And then they are into 18th century novels about vampires. And then they are into esoteric philosophy. And that does not help us in any way. All right? This is not a passive form of entertainment. This is not a passive form of intellectually stimulating entertainment. And a lot of the people who could be part of a revolutionary organization get sucked into pseudo-intellectual entertainment. And furthermore, there are a lot of people who would be part of our movement, but because they see it as this, they see it as kind of a niche internet interest, they're not interested in it. There's a lot of great community organizers. Gabby was on the phone with one of them the other day. Somebody who runs a great organization in their community. And I mean, I don't know this person. I wasn't on the phone with them, but I can be sure that person doesn't know my name. That person doesn't know the name of any of the people in our sphere of revolutionary politics because they're too busy organizing in their community. But if they came across us and they went to one of our workshops, they would probably really like what we stand for. They'd probably find our message to be very clarifying and inspiring. But they see what we're about as some kind of internet niche fandom, so it doesn't really interest them. And that we need to stop being the kind of group that recruits people that are looking for some kind of weird internet pseudo-intellectual entertainment and start being the kind of group that recruits the kind of people who want to be part of a group, people who want to get something done in their community, people who want to have comrades, people who want to be friends with other people, people who want to be working for the good of the country, the kind of person who joins a church, the kind of person who joins the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. That's who we ought to recruit into our organization. We ought to recruit people who want to believe in something and want to relate to their fellow human beings and want to be in a group. And that is not an easy transition to make. But let the fandoms recruit the people that want to be entertained. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to reach strategic equilibrium and be actually prepared for this. So let the fandoms recruit the people that are looking for a good show, the people who want to be entertained, the people who want a great show that they can watch for a couple years and then change the channel to watch another show. Let them recruit them. And let's focus on becoming the kind of group that can draw in and bring in the kind of people who want to get something done in their community. Let's start being that kind of organization. And that's a challenge. It's not easy, and it doesn't come overnight. It doesn't come overnight. And it's not easy. But we need to learn the art of putting on events, of making new contacts constantly, of showing people what we're about and what we can do. That's something we need to learn to do. And these are not hard things. But the fact that we set the convention date a year from this coming Friday, right? July 12th, 2025. Chicago area. That's a long time. That's a long time from now. And it gives us plenty of opportunity. Plenty of opportunity to change. It gives us plenty of opportunity to make mistakes. Plenty of opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't. And people are already working hard. And we're the National Convention Committee. We're having meetings every Wednesday night. And we're getting it done. And it's difficult and new habits and changing. But we are becoming an organization that is prepared for strategic equilibrium. An organization that is prepared to sink its roots among the masses. That's what we're preparing to do. Yeah. And it may not be easy to do it, and it puts people out of their comfort zone. I warned people we would lose some people when we made this turn, and I was right. I was absolutely right. There were some people who were scared. Let's just be frank. There were some people that were scared. They were scared to go out and do outreach. They were scared of being seen with the group. They kept saying things like, oh, why don't we just accept being small? And there were other people who weren't comfortable with how we were doing it. They wanted to sit around and write obscure documents and academic plans about what we should do. When it came time to actually do it, they were scared. They just didn't have it. And that sucks. And I'm convinced that people that have gone astray can come back. And I'm convinced that we can learn from our own mistakes. We make mistakes too. I make plenty of mistakes. I don't claim to be divine or infallible by any means. I make loads of mistakes. But with strategic equilibrium hanging over our heads, we have no choice. We have to kind of change how we operate. I'll tell you all a story. And this is a story about somebody who I haven't worked with in 2 years now. And he was quite useless even before that. But this person, he was a student at one of the colleges here in New York City. I worked with him He was interested in my politics. He watched our YouTube channel. And this person was a student at one of the colleges here in New York City. And you know, we would do outreach on his campus when we were having an event here in New York. We'd put up posters. And I was always saying to him, hey, do you know anyone we might be able to bring? You might be able to bring next time we have a class or something. He always say, no, I don't know anybody. So then one day I'm looking at his Facebook. On his Facebook, he makes a status. Oh, I went to the first meeting of the Communist Club on my campus today, and it was awful, and I hated it. And I pull my phone out, and I call him on the phone. I say, dude, there's a Communist Club on your campus. Why didn't you tell me this? And he says to me, oh, I went to their meeting. They don't support Venezuela. And I said, yeah, but they're 19. Why didn't you invite me to the meeting? He said, because they don't support Venezuela. They're not real revolutionaries. They're not anti-imperialists. I don't care. I said, dude, they're 19. I didn't support Venezuela when I was 19 either. But there's a communist club on your campus. I said, how many people were there? He said, there was 15 people at the meeting. I said, well, when's the next meeting? I'm going. You're taking me. You're signing me into your university, and I'm going there, and I'm going to meet these people. And he said, but they're wrong. They're ultra-left Maoists or whatever. I said, I don't care if they're wrong. I want to go meet them. This is our foot in the door. We could meet these people. And he's like, but we don't want to because they're wrong. I said, no, we do want to. I said, the next time we have an event of our own, we could sign these people up and invite them. We could all come. No, we don't want them. I was at a loss. And I look back on that conversation. So many times I look back on that conversation as just an example of why this person did not get it. I mean, it just didn't occur to him that on his college campus, it's very anti-communist, somebody starts a communist club. And I'm here talking to him about how we can build our new communist organization, Center for Political Innovation, or whatever we used to be called. Never occurs to him that we should go and talk to these people. And his excuse is, well, they don't support Venezuela. And I say to him, dude, they're 19. Yeah, convince them. You know, and like that moment showed me that like he just didn't have an outreach mindset. It just never occurred to him that we could actually grow, that we could actually do anything. You know, in a year, I mean, we're having a meeting tomorrow. In a year, we are going to develop a list of thousands of names and thousands of contacts that we can call and invite to our events. That is what we are going to do. We are going to develop contacts and outreach lists of thousands of people that we can get to our events. So that when we do have our event on July 12th, 2025, it will be the biggest event we've ever done. We had 160 people at our national convention in December in Portland. And I think we can very easily get 400 people at our event in Chicago next year. But it won't be easy because we will have to get over the hurdle of becoming outreach oriented. We've been lazy because we've been relying on the internet. We've been assuming that, hey, people will see on the internet that our event is happening. People will know about it on the internet, and that will make them come. And that has gotten us into a lazy place. We have to learn to do outreach. And outreach is difficult because it often has a very low rate of return. Often you put out 500 leaflets and you get one person as a result. Right? Often you call up 100 people to come to the event and one of them comes. The secret to outreach is you have to have massive numbers of people that you are doing outreach to. And it's painful. It's painful to do because you have to know what it's like to experience rejection. And you have to be able to deal with people saying, fuck you, I don't want your leaflet. And the other thing about outreach is you learn that the way you connect with people is not by having the correct revolutionary line. not by being smarter than other people. It's by actually being relatable. It's by actually caring about people, by establishing a personal connection with people. That's how you bring them in. I've said it before. I've said it probably on the last 3 streams. I'm going to say it again, and I hope, I hope. It's a very good point, Gavin. You've got a very good point. And there's already a question that's going to force me to say that later. That's a good point, Gavin. But I hope that certain people are listening right now, because these fandom builders who have made it abundantly clear that they hate CPI, they've tried to destroy CPI, they've spread lies about CPI, they've viciously targeted me on a personal level, they've done everything they can to break up our community, from telling lies, from sending informers into the group to divide the group, from trying to buy off our members. You name it. These people have been vicious, right? These people, these fandom builders who have no idea what a mass organization would ever look like. One of these clowns, he said that, oh, well, I know what it's like to be a leader of a revolutionary organization. I used to be the president of a club with 12 people in it at my college. Oh, what an idiot, These goofballs, right? These goofballs who've decided that in order to enhance their fandom, they must destroy our community. At the same time that they are just determined to destroy CPI, and they are determined to destroy CPI. It's like any opportunity they have to attack us, they attack us. Whether they're insulting us, whether they're spreading lies about us, they are vicious. These are evil motherfuckers, all right? And, they are evil motherfuckers, okay? And there's no question about it, right? But they give us the biggest compliment in the world, which is that they watch everything we do very, very carefully. And then they try to replicate it somehow where we're excluded from it. And right there, that tells you that they're admitting we know more about politics. One of these jackoffs, right? For years, I was talking about patriotic socialism. I was talking about American socialism with American characteristics, and all over the internet, me, Peter Coffin, we were smeared. Nazis, white supremacists. Patriotic socialism is the same as National Socialism. We were smeared. People wouldn't speak to me. I would go to leftist events in New York City, and I would try to talk to people, and people say, I heard on the internet that you're promoting National Socialism and white nationalism. They went all in to destroy me over patriotic socialism. And where were these people? Crickets. They never spoke up and said we weren't Nazis. They never defended us. They never said anything about it. We invited them to our events. They wouldn't come because, what would other people think? And one of these jackoffs who has never done anything to defend us now just discovered, American socialism, patriotic socialism is a good thing. And I've heard he even admits in personal conversations that he's learned from my work, but he doesn't want anyone to know that. And he excludes us. They exclude us from everything they do. And they work with people who spread really vicious, nasty lies about us and tried to destroy our organization. And so at the same time that on the one hand, they are trying to destroy our organization, they are actively looking through everything we do and trying to replicate it in some way. And I know what these people are doing, because at their events, they have 5 people there. They have 10 people there. They got a huge boatload of money to pay for it. They get 5 people. They get 10 people there. And then they see our national convention where we have 160 people, and they go, this can't be happening, right? And they just seethe and rage, and they just don't get it. And they don't understand, right? They don't get it. They've spread every lie in the world about us. We don't go away, right? They've locked us out and tried to isolate us from every space where we should be recruiting and all of that, and we still don't go away, right? They break apart our organization. They They do everything they can to try and destroy us. We don't go away. And then they copy exactly what we do, and they still aren't able to get anywhere near the amount of crowds of people at their events that we get. So how is this possible? Well, here's the thing. Come to our events and you'll see. And you'll see that we care about each other in CPI. You'll see that we're a community. You'll see that we have a bond. You see, I'm not just trying to make money like they are. I'm not just trying to destroy other people's reputations so I can get the highest YouTube numbers and have a big fandom like they are. This is my life. These are my people. CPI is my family. I love these people. I'm not just exploiting them to make money. I'm not just trying to build, build some fandom. I care about these people. I love these people. I have a connection with these people, and these people are connected to each other. Watch the morning messages and see how many members rely on this community. How many people are invested in this community? How many people really believe in what we're about? How many people have taken on aspects and made it their own? You know, from a distance, CPI might look like it's my personal fandom, and that's a big problem because it's not. Right? CPI is full of dynamic, amazing, dedicated people other than myself. Right? I happen to be the guy who's on here streaming every night, but CPI wouldn't be possible if there weren't people who really have made this their own project. I mean, you look at what John McCarthy has done for the Uhuru movement. You look at what Gabby has done in Chicago, right? You look at what so many people from around the country, if I started naming them all, I would forget somebody and then I'd hurt a lot of feelings. I shouldn't have even named the people I just named. There's so many people that are really into this project. It's not my personal fandom. But the jealous wreckers, they think it's my personal fandom. They don't understand what organizing actually means. They don't understand what a real community actually means. And they think CPI is my personal fandom, which it is not. And they want a personal fandom that size, which it is not. And they don't care about the people they organize with. They're very cynical. They'll throw them under the bus the moment that they think it'll hurt their reputation or think they might get some clout, right? And I've seen that with these people. They have no problem betraying best friends, betraying people they're close to, because it's all just a competitive internet game to these people, right? And these people just don't understand any of this. They don't understand what CPI is about. They don't understand what the city building tendency is all about. They don't understand why we have gatherings where people from very different walks of life, people of different ages, people of different ethnic backgrounds, people of different income levels, people from different demographics, people from different states, people who you would never guess would be in the same organization can come together. There's people in our organization that are born again evangelical Christians who hate gay marriage, hate abortion. There are people in our organization who are gay and lesbian and transgender. There are people in our organization that are hardcore atheists and people in our organization that are Christians. There are people in our organization that are anti-religious. There are people in our organization that are religious. We do something amazing. We are doing something amazing here in CPI. And if you want what we have, come and experience it for yourself, and then you will understand it. But as long as you have a cynical attitude, as long as it's just about building a fandom, as long as the very things that make you hate me are the things that make you not understand what we're doing here. The fact that these people have it in their head that in order for them to succeed and get the fandom they want, they've got to bring CPI down. The fact that they can't just come to a CPI event and find out what it is that brings us together. The fact that they've always got to be conspiring to lock us out some way. That in and of itself is why they will never understand what CPI is about. They are their own worst enemies. If they were to understand what CPI is about, they would be part of CPI. Or they would do what they're doing in a way where they didn't care about us. But the fact that they have a competitive attitude, the fact that it's all just a big internet fandom, the fact that they can betray and stab their friends in the back so viciously for personal short-term gain, the fact that they go out of their way to watch what we do and copy it while bad-mouthing us and smearing us in the hopes that they can get what we have and exclude us. The fact that they operate that way, it just shows that they don't get it, and they'll never get it, because we're doing something different, right? They're selling oranges and we're selling apples. We're selling pears and they're selling bananas. We're offering people community. We're offering people ideology. We're offering people a real movement to try and change the world. These people are offering internet entertainment, and they're only going to get frustrated and more bitter. I'm just being honest. They're only going to get more frustrated and more bitter because the internet is rigged, and certain people get selected to be the voice of certain communities. And if you're not that person, you get smeared. And trust me, I've seen it. You don't know how many of these people will be friendly to me when they first start out. And this is something I've noticed a lot. A lot of these fandom builders, when they first are launching, they're really friendly to me. But as they get boosted and as it's made clear that they are assigned a certain beat, they get to be the boss of a certain kind of thing, then they immediately turn on us. And that's how these people are, right? I mean, look how short the friendships that some of these social media personalities are capable of having are. Look how short, and look at how much they backstab and betray each other, right? Again, internet fandoms are just about internet fandoms. We're building a real community. We have real bonds with each other. We know what we're doing, and it's something different than what these people are doing, and they don't understand that. They just don't understand it. They just don't get it, right? And if they got it, they wouldn't be obsessed with trying to destroy CPI, right? If they got it, they wouldn't have a problem saying, you know what, Caleb and Peter Coffin were right about patriotic socialism, and they're not Nazis. If they were right about it, they wouldn't go out of their way to do everything they can to try and destroy CPI. If they were right about it, they would be begging us to come to their events and sit next to them at the table, not conspiring to see how to make sure that we get locked out of something so that they can feel like they're so special. Because at the end of the day, I just got to tell you, a lot of this shit doesn't matter. Let me just emphasize this. A lot of this shit doesn't matter. When the crisis gets real, how many likes you get, how many shares you get, how much money you made on a YouTube stream, none of that is going to matter at all. Do you think that in the Revolutionary Civil War in China, when they were fighting the Japanese invaders, do you think for a moment people were worried about this kind of bullshit? Do you think in a real crisis, when people are really suffering, really struggling to survive, do you think how effective of a fandom niche you are matters to these people? Matters at all? None of that matters. Right? All this pseudo-intellectual entertainment, all this backbiting internet culture, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. And the struggle right now is not just to realize that it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter. The struggle right now is to stay on task so we don't let this bullshit seep into our organization. Because every time we pause, every time we're not building for a big event, every time we're not out there getting names, every time we're not out there with a new project, when we freeze as a group, that's when this bullshit starts seeping in. And it's always going to be bullshit. And that's why we've got to stay on task. That's why we've got to be bringing in new names all the time. That's why we've got to be handing out leaflets. That's why we've got to have events to build for, because if we don't, when people aren't involved in actually building a revolutionary organization, they stop. And then what do they get? They pull out their phone, they look at Twitter, they look at YouTube, and then all this bullshit just seeps into the group. And all this negativity and this ego contest, it slips into the group. And it's hard. And it's something I struggle with. And it's something all of us struggle with. All right. And the only way that we can keep this toxicity from inserting itself into our circles is we have to go and do what we're supposed to do. Right? And it's weird coming to that realization. Right? It's very weird to come to that realization, to realize that in a way we should almost be thankful for all this nonsense, because this nonsense will force us to stay on task. I am more guilty of this than anybody, Gavin. I am not condemning anybody. I am the most guilty of this. This stuff keeps me awake at night, what these people have done to me. I am the most guilty of this. So please do not think that I'm condemning anyone else. I am the most guilty of all of this. But I've realized in the last couple months, there is only one cure. There's only one way to protect ourselves from it. And that is, we have to stay on task. And as long as we stay on task, this stuff doesn't affect us. It's like garlic and vampires, right? In the vampire movies, right? You got garlic around your neck, no vampires. And you're not thinking about vampires. Vampires just stay away. You got garlic around your neck. But you take that garlic off and suddenly you're looking over your shoulder for the vampire and all of that. That's how it is. As long as we're on task, as long as we're having our own events, as long as we're building our own group, as long as we're doing outreach, as long as we're engaged in getting stuff done, this stuff rolls right off our backs. But when we freeze, when we decide, oh no, when we get into a rut, and suddenly everybody notices what so-and-so said about us, everybody notices what so-and-so just did, everybody, and it all just comes seeping back into the group. And I'm more guilty of this than anybody, right? There's some people watching right now who are way, way better about this than I am, and I admire all of you. I admire all of you who are better about this than I am. I really do. But we just, in a way, we should see this as an opportunity. Because every time we start to get bogged down in this bullshit, we should remember, we're not on task. We're not building our group. You know why we're upset about what so-and-so said? You know why we're upset about the rumors and the gossip and the this and the that? You know why? Because we're not focused on building our group. Every time we start to feel this way, every time we get caught up in this, we need to just interpret that this is a reminder that we're not doing what we need to be done. And as long as we stay focused, this won't affect us. And at the end of the day, as much as these people see themselves as competitors with us, we're not competing with them. We're not competing with them for multiple reasons. Number one, we allow dual membership. You can be a member of CPI and be a member of any political party, any group. Number one. Number two, we're not trying to recruit these people. And there's a super chat about that, and I will get to that. We don't want to recruit the people that are already part of these fandoms. We want to recruit the masses of people. We are organizing in preparation for strategic equilibrium, not to be king of fringe elements in strategic defensive. And that's what CPI is about. Patriotic socialism, government of action to fight for working families. In fact, if we were only trying to organize in strategic defensive, we would sound very different. We'd be focused on being an isolated sect and being fanatical and keeping everyone fired up. We're not. We're talking about patriotic socialism. We're talking about religion. We're talking about our 4-point plan. Everything we do is with the intention of becoming a real mass organization that could actually win. And because we intend to be a real mass organization that could actually win, we're not trying to recruit these people. We're trying to recruit the masses. So anyway, this has been a long, meandering conversation. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I see some people in the chat and I want to just block them. But I feel like I don't quite know who to block, right? I don't, if someone comes in and they're actually being like straight up hostile and nasty, I'll block them. But if somebody comes in and they're disagreeing a little bit, I want to keep them here because I hope that I can sway them, and I see the chat, and I see what's going on in the chat to some degree. I will admit, sometimes I'm all for being political. I'm all for being polite. I'm all for being diplomatic, but sometimes people just got to be told how it is. Look, they just got to be told that, you continue to, you continue to try and destroy us, and we notice, right? You go out of your way to diss us, we notice, right? You pay very close attention to what we do and mimic it in a way that excludes us, and we notice, right? And sometimes you just got to tell people how it is. I mean, we see you, we know what you're doing, we don't appreciate it, and we've been watching it for years, and pretending to be friendly to us while you continue to engage in that behavior is not appreciated. It's not appreciated. The fake nice, pretending, oh, everything's fine, when there's been no apology, when there's been continued efforts to sabotage us, continued efforts to lie about us and smear us. Look, I mean, if you want to know anyway, I could go on about this all night. Sometimes it's just not appreciated, the way people act. When people pretend they want to get along when they work with people who literally, have gone out of their way to harm us over and over and over again. It's not appreciated. It's not appreciated. But anyway, I think it's because it's so damn hot in this room. It is so hot in this room. I don't have air conditioning in this room. I'm going to open a window. I think that's the first thing I'm going to do. I am going to open a window, but I should put some music on or something. I should put some music on before I open the window, right? What music should I put on? I feel like putting on something classical. I am going to put on Mozart Turkish March, Rondo alla Turca by Mozart. I've always liked that because that march by Mozart is very rhythmic. And so I'm going to put on Mozart's Turkish March, and I'm going to open the windows because I am sweating like crazy in this bedroom because I don't have air conditioning in this bedroom. And then after that, I'm going to answer people's super chat questions. And, if you're in CPI, we're having a meeting tomorrow night to discuss the convention we're doing next year. And, I'm going to answer people's questions about world events, about everything else. So hold on. It's doing that thing where it doesn't want me to download stuff. I've downloaded this piece of music many times before, and that's probably why it doesn't want me to download it. But I'm going to put on Mozart, and then after I put on Mozart, we can do the roll call, and then I'll start answering people's questions, and I'll try to lighten it up. I don't know why this got so dark, but some days are easier than others. I think we can all experience that. Some days are easier than others. What's that? Are those clouds, Terry? Are those clouds? Is that what those are? I don't know. Oh. It's interesting about Michael Jackson. I don't know the details of the case. I do know when I was in the Workers' World Party, we defended Michael Jackson. They argued that the case against Michael Jackson was transphobic. It's almost cringe now. It's embarrassing, but that was the argument. They said that they appealed to anti-trans bigotry to demonize Michael Jackson. That was the argument that they used. It was pretty silly. But I do know there are some people who I do respect who do believe that Michael Jackson was innocent or was done dirty, that he wasn't a child molester. And I honestly don't know the details about the case. That whole thing was very, very bizarre, I will say. I believe there were 2 trials, right? I can tell Gabby is totally not into it. And sending some cool air. Oh, gotcha. You're sending some cool. Farrakhan defended Michael Jackson. No kidding. That's something. See, if Farrakhan defends Michael Jackson, right? First of all, Farrakhan, no one's going to ever say Farrakhan was some LGBT activist because he certainly wasn't that. But if Farrakhan was defending Michael Jackson, that makes me think that there must be something there. That's big. That's big. I did not know that, John. Thank you for sharing that very important detail. All right, let's put on some Mozart while I open some windows. And then we're going to lighten this up, and I'm going to get in a better mood, and I'm going to talk about things in a better way. All righty. And that was Mozart, and the windows are open and the breeze is coming, and we're getting to a much better place. So thank you for being with me. That's what I love about all of you who are watching this. You're with me with the ups and the lows, and sometimes I get fired up, and sometimes I get into a bad mood, and you all are with me, right? And I'll be with you when you're in a bad mood, and we'll be with each other, and that's what's important. So thank you all for being here. This community has been through so much. This is live stream what? Number 757 or 755. You know how much we're on here? So thank you. Much love, much love, much love, much love, much love, much love. We're staying strong. And thank you, everybody, for tolerating me getting a little bent out of shape between the hot air and everything that was on my mind. But I hope you learned something. In regards to strategic equilibrium, etc. So names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Who's with us? Names and locations. Bob in Troy, New York. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Harry in Florida. Dustin in Cleveland, Ohio. Amin from Lebanon. Interesting. David in San Jose. Ty Blee. Alex Rickle in Oregon. John McCarthy in Chicago. Denver, Colorado. Jenny in Cincinnati. Orange County, Molly McGuire. Shout out to you. Zachary Campbell in Missouri. Al in Sydney, Australia. Dan from Niswander in Los Angeles. Melissa from Phoenix, Arizona. Brooklyn in the house. Can you mention the petition? Yes, I can. Thank you for the reminder, Phil. Before I forget, let me pull that up so it can be the first thing I mention. Thank you for reminding me. That's very important. Phil has a great petition. All right. Names and locations. Terry. We're going to scroll up here. I stepped away from the page for a minute, and then it's doing that thing where it won't let me scroll up. Okay. Terry from beautiful Portland, Oregon. And Terry is awesome. Steve and Ann in Ringgold, Georgia. I'm going to be talking to somebody prominent in your state tomorrow. You were going to see I'm doing a podcast with somebody from Georgia, very prominent. I mentioned it on last night's stream. Gabby in Chicago. Patrick in Maine. Kirby in Chattanooga. Work in Progress, Ontario. Canada. Seasoned Noob. Patrick in Maine. Kirby in Chattanooga. Thank you. Well, this growth booklet, I put in the order yesterday for 1,000 more of these to get out. And I am very excited. So yeah, I got to pick it up from the printer, and then I got to figure out how to get it to the Midwest. Mariah in North Carolina. Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, everybody. Toronto, Ontario, Ottawa, Ontario, Kirby in Chattanooga. Very, very good. Very, very good. Mark Jones in New York. Yes, 1,000 more of them. I made the call. I put in the order. Yeah, it's great. It's a pamphlet that if you read it, you will understand what we're all about. It was a smash hit at the Libertarian Party convention. Alex in Brazil, Tomas in Malaysia. Welcome. Wow, Lebanon, Malaysia, Tasmania, Alex in Brazil. This what we got going on here is very, very special, right? Yay, we got to hustle is rough, but it's worth it. Thank you, Gabby. It's going to be awesome, right? And I mean, that's the way you got to do it, right? You get the resources together, you get yourself a very professional, glossy little booklet like this, full of images and graphics explaining what we believe, in a very popular writing style that people can relate to. It's great. Phil in Scablands, Washington. Yeah, good times. All right, so Phil here in New York, friend of mine. Phil has this petition that he has put together to end all sanctions on countries that affect their ability to get health care. And we would like people to sign that petition. It's very, very important. Phil is a retired EMT and prominent member of his church's global health ministry, and this is a very, very important petition. So we've promoted it on these streams before. If you haven't signed it, please do. There's a link at the top of the page for you to sign it. Please go ahead and sign it. Heck yeah, my son wishes we had bullet trains. Beautiful. I'll put it in the Rumble chat as well. So there we go. I see there's a Rumble rant that's come in from Jamie Turner. Very good. Very good. So yeah. All right. Well, listen, folks, I'm going to start answering people's super chat and Rumble rant questions. So if you want to send more in, give me something to react to, keep the show going for a little while longer, it would be appreciated. Super chats are not only good in terms of, of giving me something to talk about, they're also good in supporting this channel and my ability to maintain this expensive New York City apartment where I have this extra room for my home studio to do my work in. So super chats are appreciated if you want to send a super chat. First super chat is from Jamie Turner. He says, thoughts on Dr. Shiva's view of mass movements. Well, we interviewed Dr. Shiva here on this channel. We had a conversation, and in the conversation, he and I pretty much agreed that the internet is rigged. The future is in real life, building mass movements. We were in pretty solid agreement. So there we go. So yeah, I mean, you can go and watch the interview I did with Dr. Shiva. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. I actually, in that interview, I defended certain people that he bashed in the interview, which, he attacked certain people and certain things. And these are people that would never defend me. And I defended them when Dr. Shiva said certain things. I'm not going to get into specifics, but go back and watch the interview. He said certain things. And I said, whoa, hold up. I was careful. I didn't get into a fight with him, but he's a lot like me in some ways, and I sympathize with him. And that's why I think the conversation at least went pretty well, because he gets it, right? He gets how vicious these fandoms can be. And, I mean, he gets very, very frustrated. And I get frustrated too. And that's why you just got to get offline, and I do apologize for the opening stream, and thank you, Phil. Phil was, in the chat saying how much we love you. And I apologize. I shouldn't have been so bitter, right? We should have focused on, the point, which was strategic equilibrium, strategic defensives, just strategic offensive, right? I got a little bitter there towards the end because I didn't appreciate what someone in the chat was saying. And I shouldn't have done that. I owe you all a better product than that. I really do. But look, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it is not easy. And, I am who I am. And, Chris in Salt Lake City. Love you, Chris. So I do apologize for that, for everyone watching. I will try to do better. Thank you, Terry, for understanding. Thank you. I do appreciate it. And we'll see. I'll consult with people. I'll consult with people after this stream and see what we should do. But yeah. Hey, people get me fired up sometimes. So now I'm going to start answering super chats. But yeah, Dr. Shiva and I, we had a great chat. It was good. And we seem to be on the same page. And, we share a bitterness. We share a certain bitterness. You saw that bitter side of me tonight. I'll do better about that. I owe it to you all. And I think Dr. Shiva can relate to some of that bitterness as well. We may not agree on a lot. I certainly did not invent email myself. He did. I didn't. But I think we can relate to how the internet fandoms bring out the worst in people, bring out the competitiveness, bring out the, thanks, Gabby. I appreciate it. And that's the thing. I know you guys will forgive me. You guys have been with me through a lot. And sometimes when you need to open a window and someone in the chat is annoying you, Scott Ritter wrote an important piece for Consortium News about the collapse of arms control. The name of the piece is My Life's Work Melting Before My Eyes. And he's talking about how at the end of the Cold War, Scott Ritter was sent to the former Soviet Union to oversee nuclear agreements that would make sure there would not be another arms race. And right now he is watching those nuclear agreements be ripped up. And, Scott is a friend of mine. Scott is someone that I really appreciate. And for him to be saying what he's saying is very, very serious. Nuclear war is not a joke. And one point that Scott Ritter has frequently made, and I think this is a very good point, is that tactical nuclear weapons present a much bigger danger of nuclear war breaking out than big ones, because big nukes, right? If one country drops a hydrogen bomb on another country, humanity ends. That's it. But a tactical nuclear bomb is something that can be used. And then another country responds by using a tactical nuke themselves. And because their impact is smaller, the likelihood of them being used goes up, right? You don't have mass assured destruction with a tactical nuke. And so people are more likely to use them. But then once there's been an exchange of tactical nukes, then the bigger nukes come out. And tactical nukes actually present a bigger danger of nuclear war, not a smaller danger of nuclear war. They never should have been invented. And I think Scott Ritter himself has pointed that out as well. Tactical nuclear weapons never should have been invented because they make it easier to have a nuclear war. So, yeah. I mean, there you go. All righty. Medea Benjamin just praised Marjorie Taylor Greene as anti-war. I love Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't love what she says about Israel, but Marjorie Taylor Greene has made some amazing speeches. And I am going to tell, so tomorrow, and just so you all know, I am going on the podcast, Guns, Jesus, and Babies. That's where I'm going tomorrow. Tomorrow night, I am recording with Candace Taylor, the Republican candidate for governor of Georgia. And Candace Taylor and I are going to talk at 5 p.m. tomorrow. We're doing a pre-tape. And when I speak with Candace Taylor, I'm going to try to focus the conversation on where we agree, which may not be much because she's from a very conservative evangelical background, but we're both against the liberal order. We're both Christians. We're both, we both don't trust the government. We're critical of vaccine mandates. We're critical of a lot of things that the government does. So I feel like there will be common ground between myself and Candace Taylor. But, one thing I'm going to talk about, maybe I'll bring it up. I assume they're on good terms. I'm going to mention I like MTG. What I like about MTG is that MTG, I like when she was up in front of Congress. She's like, no food for mothers, but weapons for Ukraine. That was amazing. And the comment, do I still have the clip? I think I might still have the clip of what she said about Ukraine. Do I still have this clip? I think I might have it. There was a moment where she went on a Trumper podcast to talk about Ukraine, and it was amazing. I could not believe she was talking about how the U.S. economic system is centered around war. It was amazingly powerful. If I can find that clip, do I still have it? I don't think I still have it. Looks like I don't still have it. It was amazing. So, I mean, there are some moments with Marjorie Taylor Greene where I just get up and applaud. Don't like her on immigration. Don't like her on Israel. Don't like her on a lot of things. But on Ukraine, she's amazing. On economic nationalism and the trade deals, she's amazing. On election fraud and social media censorship, amazing. On Assange, she was amazing. She called Julian Assange a hero against the deep state, exposing the crimes of the deep state. That was amazing. There's a lot of things about Marjorie Taylor Greene that I can appreciate. I can certainly appreciate. Let me see if I can find the clip of Marjorie Taylor Greene where she was just awesome. She was just awesome. I was like, is this for real? I thought it was amazing what she said. Yes, here it is. I found the clip. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let me just download the clip here. I will show you. Again, if there used to be socialists who talked this way. they don't exist anymore. You know, and yeah, we'll download the clip. There we go. There we go. All righty. Here we go. All right. This was amazing, right? This is MTG, right? And she's ranting about the money that was just passed for Ukraine and how she and the congressional MAGA Republicans fought against it. And this outburst was amazing.
Not an economy anybody wants. We don't want an economy built on people's blood and dead bodies in foreign countries. We want an America first economy. And from now on, Steve, we are going to demand it from our Republican leaders. I don't care if the Speaker's office becomes a revolving door. If that's exactly what needs to happen, then let it be. But the days are over of the old Republican Party that wants to fund foreign wars and murder people in foreign lands while they stab the American people in their face and refuse to protect Americans and fix our problems over here.
Yeah, we don't need an economy based on dead bodies in foreign countries. That's what imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, is. It's an economy based on holding back development and impoverishing people all over the world and enforcing this international financial system with war and militarism, a system that's impoverishing the world, and it's not good for the American people. And we need an America first economy. I love this.
This is not an economy anybody wants. We don't want an economy built on people's blood and dead bodies in foreign countries. We want an America first economy.
I couldn't agree with her 100%. Like, everything she said there was so on point. AOC is supposed to be a socialist, and she would never say that. This is not an economy that anyone wants. We don't want an economy based on people's blood and dead bodies in foreign countries. We need an America first economy, an economy that works for the people of this country, not in the interest of Wall Street and its wars enforced with imperialism. This is amazing.
This is not an economy anybody wants. We don't want an economy built on people's blood and dead bodies in foreign countries. We want an America first economy.
That's what I want. I want an America first economy. I want a government of action that fights for working families. That's what I want. So there we go. So Medea Benjamin just praised Marjorie Taylor Greene. So what did she say? Let me pull up. I'm going to pull up, John. I'm going to pull up what she said. Hold on. One thing at a time here. Now I'm going to pull up what she said. What is it that Mark Twain, he said, a man who never lies never has to remember what he said. I think that's funny. All right. So Medea Benjamin says, I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Oh, there's a video with it. I can just show that video. I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on many things, such as her stance on healthcare, environmental protections, and immigration, but she's one of the very few members of Congress who dares to defy the bipartisan praise of NATO, a military alliance that drags us into foreign wars. I wish more elected officials would take her anti-war stance. Thank you. You know, there was a time where I think Code Pink originally praised her and then backed away from it. I'm glad that they are back to praising MTG, right? You know. All righty. Here we go. All right. This is MTG on NATO. Woo. MTG on NATO.
Here with the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. What do you think of NATO?
Well, I actually think that as a member of Congress, we should be focused on our country, on America. I'm really not interested in foreign wars or what's happening in other places. I think it's important that Americans' hard-earned tax dollars are spent on solving our problems here at home, and we have a lot of them.
Yeah, great. I'm glad Medea Benjamin is being mature like that. So there you go. Unite, ye oppressed, recognize your oppressors. Right? The Judean People's Front. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, I get you. Right? You know, Joe, I'm with you, right? At the same time, you know, at the end of the day, even that I want to be careful with. And actually, yes, I am. But no, even that, Joe, I want to be a little careful with, because, you know, when we talked about this in the opening part of the stream, hold on, let me put it back on the stream, right? When we talked about about these three stages. What we're essentially describing in these three stages is as society falls apart, we build. Let me repeat that. As society falls apart around us, we build. That's basically what it means to be a revolutionary. During the strategic defensive, society is not falling apart. And so you can't build because society is already built and no one wants to be a part of you. But strategic equilibrium starts when society has fallen apart so much, they need you to build. And then the strategic offensive is at the point that society has fallen apart so much that you are the only one who can build, and you have to build. Revolution is really about building. It is not about destruction. We are city builders. The old system comes apart, right? First of all, in a non-revolutionary period, society is not falling apart. Capitalism is functional enough that they don't need us to build. Strategic equilibrium starts when society has fallen apart enough that they need us to build. They need us to do what the Uhuru movement is doing, to build the hospitals, to build the community centers, to organize the people while giving them an ideology. And the strategic offensive begins at the point that society has fallen apart so much that if we don't become the government, it's just going to fall to complete barbarism. It's going to fall to complete shreds. That's what Rosa Luxemburg was talking about with socialism or barbarism. So really what we're doing is we're building. And strategic defensive is a period where we can't build. And that's the period we've been in for decades. We've been in strategic defensive where we cannot build. But strategic equilibrium is when suddenly they need us to build and we can build again. And strategic offensive is where we have to take over because only we can keep building. Revolution is about building. It's not about destruction. And that's why, and this is something I've noticed, people say, well, Caleb, what do communists do? Communists protest against racism. Communists protest against the government. And there's all kinds of people doing that, right? People are doing Black Lives Matter protests. People are protesting against Donald Trump. And so communist groups should be big and popular now. But they're not. Why? Because these protests are purely destructive. They're purely about tearing things down. Hashtag revolution is not revolution. And the Uhuru movement, you'll notice, they're just as against police brutality as Black Lives Matter, but they built in the Black community. They built communities, farmers markets, etc. And that's why they were targeted. But the bulk of BLM is just about opposing, and there should be outrage about police brutality, and there should be opposition to it. But if you're not building anything, you're really not a threat to the status quo. That's why I always quote the builder's poem. On a busy street in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho heave ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam and a sidewall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, like those you must hire if you want to build? The foreman just smiled and said, no, indeed. Common labor is all that I need, for I can easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do. So I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I that type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? Right? And I love that poem because that really expresses what I want to be, especially after I had my religious awakening. I started reciting that poem a lot more after I went on the ship in 2015, after I established my faith in God. I started reciting that poem a lot more. Even though I'd been recited that poem years ago, that poem came back to me. And that the problem with our movement is that it is largely just about appealing to people's resentment, appealing to people's anger and outrage, and not their desire to build. And that is a flaw in leftist politics, is that leftist politics is largely appealing to people's desire to tear things down, libidinal, and Oedipal instincts. And that is a problem. And especially now that those sentiments have been hijacked by the system. You've never heard me recite this poem before, Terry? Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you got to hear it. There you go. I mean, so even this, we don't want to just appeal to people's resentment, just people's desire to tear things down. We want to appeal very much to people's desire to build and people's desire to be part of a community. And that, the aesthetic of leftism, we are not leftists. Leftism without economics, without socialism, we are socialists, but we're not leftists. Leftism without socialism is just rebellion, is just libidinal impulses and releasing of libidinal rage and sexual desire. It is just the releasing of Oedipal rage at parents, rage at society. And we're not for that. That's not helpful at this time. The imperialists and the ultra powerful are using that on their own. So we are not, I'm with you about oppressed and oppressors, but even that I want to be careful with. I want to appeal to people's desire to build and construct. So there we go. All right. How do you see all the Marxist groups out there stop fighting and start working together? I don't see that. Slava, that's never going to happen. And if it did happen, it would not be for the benefit. And this is something that I have been asked about many times, and I've addressed many times, which is that if the small percentage of Americans, less than 20,000 people who call themselves communists and are in communist organizations, if they all merged into one organization, that would be one organization of 20,000 people. And that organization, in order to get all those groups together, would have to accommodate all the insane backwardness that keeps those groups fringe. I want unity with the masses. I want the millions and millions of average working class people who've never heard what a communist or a revolutionary has to say. I want to unite with them. I want to recruit them. I don't want to recruit the people that are already communists and haven't been able to do that and haven't figured out how to do that. And that's the thing, right? If this is your goal, it's not a very good goal, because first of all, it's not going to happen. And second of all, if it did, we would be nowhere closer to achieving our goal. These groups have been on the margins of US society and been irrelevant for a reason. And getting them all to be in the same group would be almost impossible. But if you were able to do that, in order to do it, you would have to accommodate so much of the very things that keep them irrelevant and fringe. Unity with the masses. Recruiting the masses, yes. Not recruiting the fringe. These people are fringe for a reason. But I'll also say, Slava, that this brings me back to the quote from Lenin about the period, right? Depression, demoralization, splits, and discord. When you don't see progress, there's a lot of splitting. Because what brings people together is victory. When people think that being in the organization and working with the other people can actually accomplish something, that's when they are willing to put up with the headaches of being in the group. But when people don't see any payout in periods of demoralization, that's when splits and defections and all of that happens, because what's the point, right? So if a period comes where we're winning real victories, there will be more unity, because people will see that the unity is worth it. And that's an important thing to keep in mind too. The sectarianism and division is a result of the fact that no one really believes we can win. And because they don't see winning happening, why should they stay in a group that's not winning? And I think that's a big part of it as well. But at the end of the day, I want unity with the masses, not with the other Marxists. And in fact, there is a small sliver of American communists that are anti-imperialist. A small sliver. And in fact, nowadays in America, and Gavin had this point earlier, if somebody calls themselves a communist, the chances of them actually being anti-imperialist are quite slim. In fact, there's less of a chance. If someone says, I'm a communist, The chances are they're obsessed with the trans issue. They're obsessed with hating Trump supporters, and they're into woke stuff. And I mean, those people are the least anti-imperialist. So, they'll spend all day talking about what order did the alphabet in. There you go. All right. I'm definitely making it to Chicago for July 12th next year. Hope one day to join CPI. Okay, well, you're welcome to join at any time. Joining CPI is just a matter of going to our website. Just a matter of going to our website. But yeah, July 12th, 2025, Chicago area. Mark your calendar. And if I would encourage people to be available for days around that, be available for that whole week, right? Set it. You got a year. A year's a long time. You got a year. And in that time, I would encourage you to make arrangements to be in the Chicago area, because we're going to do a lot more than just have a one-day event. I mean, the one-day event will be big, but we're doing an event on the 13th, the next day. We're going to be doing events beforehand, afterwards. We're going to make the most of the fact that we will concentrate our membership in Chicago. So, look, there are some things that as an organization we just have to figure out, like outreach, like constantly making new contacts. There are certain things we have to figure out, and we have a year to make mistakes, to learn from our mistakes, to do it, and people are already enthused in doing it. There are a number of people that said to me when we launched the new turn in CPI and we lost a couple people, there were a number of people who said to me, "Thank God, Caleb, I've been waiting to do this the whole time." And like we just had the Saturday meeting that we had on Saturday was the biggest Saturday Zoom call we've had in a long time. 27 people were on there. Why was it the biggest meeting? Well, we sent out a new email. We said, we're taking this new turn toward outreach. More people came to that meeting than have come to a CPI meeting in a long time. People are ready for this. The membership is ready for it. The masses are ready for it. And here, let me get you a better link. Sorry about that, John. It looks like something your cut and paste didn't work out too well. But if you want to join CPI, you can just join. Here's the form to join on the website. But look, it's time to just take off the training wheels. We're not going to recruit through the internet anymore, and we shouldn't want to recruit through the internet, right? A lot of the people who drift in from the internet are looking to be entertained, and we're still here to entertain you. I mean, but we're trying to build a real movement, and we want to recruit the kind of people who maybe would never go looking for this kind of politics, but want to be part of a real movement. And so we're taking a turn. Like the organization is shifting toward outreach and recruitment. It's shifting toward constantly making contacts and bringing people in. And it's difficult and it's not easy. It's not easy, but it must be done. So, yeah, I mean, you outreached the outreach meeting. Exactly, Terry. I outreached the outreach meeting, and it already worked. So there we go. All right, very good. So now I will continue. And thank you. I can't wait to meet you, Lewis, give you a hug. You're a member of our community, and it'll be great to see you. All right, comment. My love for America is for the people in the land. I am descended from slaves, native tribes, and the Irish. I am as American as apple pie. We need to love this country and each other in order to save it. Well, thank you for saying that, Mariah. That's really important that you say that, because there are some people that feel that if we say we're patriotic, we're being racist. And we're not. Now, Black nationalism is an ideology that I do respect. And there are many Black people who consider themselves to not be part of the United States. They consider themselves to be a colonized people, and I respect that. And I would never demand that a Black person wave the American flag or an indigenous person. But when we say we love America, we do mean Black people. We do mean brown people. We do mean indigenous people, and that it is a huge mistake to surrender our heritage to the imperialists. Huge mistake. And that, Lenin wrote this beautiful essay that I would encourage you to go read about, why he was patriotic to the Russian Empire. All right, go read it. Lenin on the national pride of the great Russians. Lenin considered the Russian Empire to be a prison house of nations, but yet he wrote this beautiful essay in 1914 explaining that they were not unpatriotic to Russia. And so right there, the attacks on patriotic socialism are always coming from a very performative, woke place. It's always, we're so revolutionary, we're not American. And what is that based on? Well, it's based on being in strategic defensive. We're not going to win over the masses of people, so we might as well just make ourselves feel so revolutionary. Well, I want us to have our eyes set on strategic equilibrium. And that requires us to aim differently. But when people are of the illusion that you can't win, that it's just a matter of making yourself feel ultra revolutionary on the internet. Sure, I'm against America. Yeah, I'm so revolutionary. And that's the point, right? We have our eyes on strategic equilibrium. We have our eyes on sinking our roots among the masses of people and building a mass anti-imperialist movement in America. That's what we have our eyes on. And as a result, we have been putting forward the patriotic socialist message for quite some time. All right. Just wanted to say thank you for everything you do. We're all human. Giving yourself grace can be the biggest challenge. Yes, I kind of lost control there for a little bit. I was pissed off at someone in the chat, and I shouldn't have done that. And I do thank you for accepting my apology. And, at the end of the day, right, I did make the main point. I did make the main point that needs to be said over and over and over again, which is we must stay on task. We must stay focused on building our group, because every time we deviate, the shit sinks in, and it's just the tragic reality. Social media is something you cannot avoid. I'm on YouTube right now. This is technically social media. We can't not be on social media. But social media is just dominated by this toxic, competitive, negative discourse. Alex Rickel, shout out to you. You liked something that I said on a recent stream. You cut a clip of me saying it. Good for you. I appreciate it, Alex. And he posted it, and a lot of people retweeted it. They liked it. But then underneath it was a slew of nasty, vicious things that were said about me on a personal level. None of them had anything to do with what was in the video. They were all just nasty things. And it's like, that's what we have to deal with. When we're not building an in real life movement, that's the pond we're swimming in. We're swimming in a pond full of sewage. We don't want to. Real life, go outside, breathe real air, touch real grass, right? Stay out of the septic tank, right? I mean, you have to some degree, right? You have to have a toilet in your house, right? But it's just, social media is just so toxic. And the tragedy is that there are so many people who get into this kind of politics who just don't even know that it can be about more than that. I wrote a whole book. It's huge, explaining what it means to build a real movement, anti-imperialist organizing in America, right? And that's why I wrote this book. This book is about the history of the Communist Party and the Workers' World Party and the new communist movement of the 70s and all of this, because I want people to know that you can build a real movement. And people don't know that. Right? And people just think that the internet entertainment thing is all you can do. And if that's what you think, you're not going to last. You're going to abandon this stuff really quickly. We need to get people into a real movement to do real work. That's, things like Phil's petition are so important. So important. Yeah. So there we go. Thank you, Molly. Am I cooled down? I am, Gabby. Thank you for your patience. I opened the windows. I'm feeling much better, right? I'm much less sweaty. My face is much less red. I'm feeling much better. And thank you for your kindness, Gabby. I really do appreciate it. You're sweet. Thoughts on woke versus classic liberation theology? Well, Huey, as I have pointed out on these streams many times, liberation theology and Christian socialism are not synonymous. I am a Christian socialist. I do not consider myself to be a liberation theologist. Liberation theology is an explicitly Roman Catholic movement. And it is a Roman Catholic movement that started in South America. Bishop Oscar Romero, and there were a number of clergy in the Roman Catholic Church that, during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, who in their Catholic theology adopted a view that was sympathetic to Marxist and socialist movements. And I admire those people. I don't have any opposition, but I'm a Protestant. And Christian socialism is much older than liberation theology. Liberation theology is a post-World War II tradition among Catholics. Christian socialism is a different trend that goes back pretty far. In our textbook, We Are City Builders, we have a very famous Christian socialist text that I think is really one of the best explanations of overproduction and the problems of capitalism ever. And it's in our textbook. It's called The Parable of the Water Tank. Right? Page 120 of We Are City Builders. You'll read The Parable of the Water Tank by Edward Bellamy. Edward Bellamy was a Christian socialist. And Edward Bellamy, he's also the guy it was his cousin who wrote the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. And in 1897, he wrote the Parable of the Water Tank, which is a great analogy for overproduction and the irrationality of the capitalist market. Christian socialism has been around, almost since the time that capitalism began. Franz Fourier and Henry Saint-Simon, Robert Owen, Christian socialism has been around for a long time as a movement. Liberation theology is a different thing. Now, you're asking me, though, specifically thoughts on woke versus classical liberation theology. So, and then Gavin is making the point. He says, well, not all liberation theology is Catholic. Right. So now, and this is where it gets really confusing. So in the 50s and 60s, you had the rise of liberation theology. In fact, there's a great speech online from UCLA that you can listen to, where Herbert Apotheker, who was a member of the Communist Party, he's one of the most famous historians of African American history in U.S. history. He speaks at UCLA about liberation theology in 1970. And it's a great presentation that this leader of Communist Party USA, Herbert Apotheker, gives about liberation theology. And he's a Jewish atheist, but he's a Communist Party member, and he speaks about the rise of liberation theology among Roman Catholics. It's a great speech that he gave at UCLA in 1970. Go and listen to it. Great stuff. Great stuff. So then, as the woke thing got going, there was a trend, the rise of people talking about white privilege, people talking about LGBT politics and all of that. There was a trend among the more academic wing of, and this is where it gets very interesting. So Dr. Cornel West, right? He's a theologian, right? Dr. Cornel West, we think of him as a black activist, but his background is in, religion, theology, right? And if you read his book, Race Matters, you read what is his book? Race Matters, Truth Matters. His book, he's always talking about prophetic Christianity, etc. And he teaches theology. And so in response to liberation theology, as the woke trend that talks about white privilege, that talks about LGBT, whatever, as that got going, in the universities, there started to be a trend of people that studied Christian theology in a very woke way And they drew from the Catholic liberation theology tradition a little bit. And they drew heavily from feminism. And most of them are like Unitarian Universalists. You get some of them that are Episcopalian. So a lot of them are mainline Protestants. But they're not Christian socialists like Edward Bellamy. And they're not technically liberation theologists. They're like woke Christians, basically. You know, the churches that have the rainbow flag in the door, in the window. The churches that have the the BLM symbol, right? The Unitarian Church, the United Church of Christ, which I grew up in. My church certainly wasn't like that in my little town. It was quite conservative, but on a national level, they're quite woke. The church, my town, almost everyone who went there was a Republican, but that's a whole other story. But those churches, you will get the clergy of those churches generally. Some of them will tell you they are socialists and they are liberation theologists, right? So Reverend John Brown, the abolition, was not a liberation theologist. No, John Brown was an abolitionist. Right? Liberation theology is a movement that started in the 50s among Roman Catholics that were sympathetic to the communist movement from a Roman Catholic perspective. John Brown was an abolitionist, and he was a part of the Second Great Awakening, right? In the lead up to the U.S. Civil War, there were all kinds of Protestants. I mean, the Second Great Awakening, right? Let's just do some history here, all right? In the lead up, as the United States was founded, there was this issue called slavery. And slavery was a big point of division. And the slave owners, they had a majority on the Supreme Court. They were overrepresented in Congress. They had the power. But slavery was hurting the United States' ability to develop as a country because it wanted to maintain a primitive agrarian economy. And it wanted the United States to just be a crop plantation for the British Empire. And, the slave owners, as new states were coming into the country, they wanted them to be slave states. They wanted to make the rest of the country cooperate with their fugitive slave law. And the ability of the United States to expand as an industrial country was weakened. The industrial capitalists didn't like the slave owners and how they were writing the laws. And the small farmers, they called them the free soilers. They were small farmers. They didn't have slaves. They didn't like the slave owners, right? And the labor unions, they didn't like slavery either, because how much are you going to get paid if you're competing with somebody who works for free, a slave? So in the North, in like the early 1800s, in the lead up to the Civil War, long before the Civil War broke out, we're talking good 30, 40 years before the Civil War. The Civil War ultimately was like the 1860s, right? There was a religious movement called the Second Great Awakening. Before the American Revolution, there had been the First Great Awakening, and that was Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God, all this. Then in the lead up to the American Civil War, they called the Second Great Awakening. And the Second Great Awakening is a very, very definitive moment in American history. In fact, in the history of American religion, Mormonism goes back to the Second Great Awakening. Seventh-day Adventism goes back to the Second Great Awakening. Tent revival preaching goes back to the Second Great Awakening. In fact, almost everything, when we think about evangelical Christianity in the United States, this is where it goes back to. And what it was the industrial capitalists were funding a mass movement against slavery because there was a division in the ruling class, and the slave owners had the upper hand, and the industrial capitalists wanted to push back the power of the slave owners. So they funded and backed a mass religious revival movement against slavery. And that's what the Second Great Awakening was. And it was a definitive moment. And John Brown was part of it. And all of these various religious fanatical groups that settled Ohio and Illinois and Pennsylvania, most of them, almost all of them, were against slavery. And that was like a defining position, as they were opposed to slavery. And that's John Brown. He was an abolitionist. Now, John Brown spoke up. I believe he advocated for the right of women to vote. I believe he did talk about workers being exploited by factory owners and the protections of workers on the job. But I've never seen anywhere where John Brown explicitly calls for socialism. So, if you're talking about socialism, he wasn't a socialist. He was a Protestant Christian, right? He was a Protestant Christian who was very opposed to slavery. And he was part of the Second Great Awakening, which was this mass movement of people in America who were very opposed to the practice of slavery. And when asked about why he opposed slavery, John Brown would always cite the Golden Rule. And they would ask him, why? Why are you so obsessed with fighting slavery? And he would say the Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if I was held in slavery, I would want someone to fight for my freedom. So, on that basis, I'm going to go fight for the freedom of the slaves. Pretty simple, not complex theology. But this guy, that's the mural in the Kansas State Capitol building of the great revolutionary John Brown with a Bible and a gun. He looks like a Houthi. In my Houthi book, I talk about him, and I make this comparison because he was a religious fanatic. He was a religious fanatic. He was an advocate of a religious government, of a theocracy. He was armed, and he was obsessed with guns and gun ownership. And he justified everything he did in the name of the Bible. He was a Republican, if there ever was one. This guy was definitely a Republican. John Brown, I mean, he was a Houthi. Was he part of the liberation theology movement? No, because it hadn't happened yet. Now, back to the main point. So there is this kind of like post-liberation theology, you can call it, right? There's Christian socialism. Then that's been around for a long time. That's Henry St. Simon. It's massive. There's a huge Christian socialist movement. Then there's liberation theology, which is in South and Central America, which is in the post-World War II years. And now you have this woke Christianity that sometimes calls itself liberation theology, which tends to be Unitarian Universalist, United Church of Christ, Episcopalian, Anglican. You have that. Methodist sometimes. Yeah. And you have that. And I don't put that in the same category. I mean, liberation theology was obsessed with economics. It was like a Marxist movement of Catholicism. Christian socialism was all about socialism. Woke Christianity, which sometimes calls itself liberation theology, is not interested in economics at all. It's, I must say this. I grew up in the United Church of Christ, and the church that I went to was very conservative. But on a national level, I went to a lot of their national youth gatherings, their national gatherings. I think their headquarters, their national headquarters was in Cleveland, in Ohio, where I live. And I went to a lot of their national gatherings. And that I know that in a lot of places, especially like a lot of suburbs and cities, the United Church of Christ exists simply to be a church where you can be gay. And especially in the Black community, right? I mean, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, his church in Chicago, I mean, now things are different, but for many years in the 80s and 90s, it was a big Black church where you can be gay. And there weren't many of those at that time. Now things have changed a little bit, but it was Reverend Jeremiah Wright's United Church of Christ, or in Chicago, was this very large Black church where one could be gay. And that there are woke churches where the focus is, we as a church are okay with you being gay. And that is their main selling point. That is why they exist. And I mean, I think gay people should be able to attend church. I think that, obviously, excluding people because of their sexual feelings or whatever is not a good thing. But is that really enough to build a denomination around? I mean, is that the basis of a denomination? And obviously there's more to their beliefs than that. But at one point, at least, their entire identity was pretty much wrapped up in, we are a church that is okay with gay people. And that presents kind of an identity issue. But anyway, that's all I'll say about that. Because I don't want to be offensive, and I don't think churches should bar people, because of their sexuality or their way of being. But I mean, it's just, if that's the basis of your religion, is that we allow gay people, is that enough of a basis? I mean, and it's like, if that's your selling point, like that's kind of weak, but who am I to say, right? I mean, I don't know. Not for me to say, but but yeah, that's, and then when I think of like woke Christianity, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, one thing, I'm just curious, right? I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm actually going to put this on the screen, and you all can tell me what you think about this, right? I'm not going to tell you what I think about it, because honestly, I'm not sure what to think about it. I'm just going to throw this on the screen. This is a verse in the Bible that is used frequently by people that believe in LGBT rights. And honestly, see, I remember when I was in the United Church of Christ when I was a kid, I sat through so many very unconvincing workshops. Very unconvincing workshops about why it's okay to be gay and Christian. And none of them actually mentioned this particular verse. And if you want to talk about a verse in the Bible that actually is pretty effective in arguing for LGBT rights, it would be this one, right? It would be this one. This would be the one. And it's interesting because this is not the one that gets pointed to as much. But actually, this verse in the Bible, there's something going on with the translation, right? It's not exactly clear what Jesus was saying when he said this, right? It's not exactly clear what Jesus was saying when he said this. He was saying something, right? And I'm sure Gavin will probably have an explanation of this, and I'm curious to see what Gavin has to say. And I'm not taking a position here because I just don't know. I honestly do not know, and it's not, it's not for me, right? But I'm just going to throw this on the screen because I think it's interesting, right? This, of all the verses in the Bible that LGBT people can point to say Christianity is on their side, this is probably the one that is the strongest. And this is interesting. Matthew 19:12. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth. They are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this receive it. What does this mean? Now, what is a eunuch? A eunuch is a man who's been castrated. And that's what it means. Now, is Jesus literally talking about men who have been castrated? Obviously not, because back in these days, there was no antibiotics, and if somebody cut you up to that degree, your chances of surviving were pretty slim. So this line about eunuchs, he's talking about something. I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but he's not talking about people who, oh, you haven't seen nothing, Terry. You have not seen nothing. I sat through these workshops and I heard reaches that you would not believe. Terry, like, this one is actually probably more convincing. He's obviously talking about something other than people who had their balls cut off. Okay. I'm sorry to be crass there, but he's not talking about men who had their balls cut off. He's talking about something else. I don't know what he's talking about there. But that said, right, Terry, you ain't seen nothing yet. I would sit in these workshops, and I am somewhat embarrassed about the leaps these people would make. One of the arguments that I heard, right, was that there's a verse. What is it in? It's in the. What was it? It was in the. It's in. Very funny, but no, it's in the epistles. They're listing bad people that are bad, and one of the people they list is homosexuals. I sat in this workshop as a high school student. At the time, I was pretty much an atheist. And I sat in this workshop and I heard them make the argument that the word for homosexual in Greek really just meant effeminate man. Right? It's like there's a verse. What is the line? I'll pull it up, right? We'll pull up this one, right? All right. This We are not politically correct in this stream. I'm about to put a verse on here that they're going to screenshot me with this verse, and they're going to call me an awful human being, but I'm just going to put it on, Bible verses on homosexuality. I heard them really, really, really reach. I heard them really reach here. I heard them reach. I'm not going to put it on the screen. I'm just going to quote. I'm just going to link I'll just give you the citation. I'm not going to put it on the screen because I don't want someone to screenshot it and be like, aha, we got you, right? But there's one of the epistles where it's listing bad people. It's listing people who do something bad. Let me pull it up. I have to pull up the verse or else this doesn't make sense. If I don't have it in front of me, it doesn't make any sense. So, okay, here we go. It's one of the epistles, right? Where is it? Hold on. It's listing various bad people and it lists homosexuals. Where is this? This is so bizarre. I cannot find this. Hold on. I heard one of the worst reaches that I've ever heard. Yes. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. It's Corinthians 6 verse 9. Corinthians 6 verse 9. Right? And they pulled up Corinthians 6 verses 9. Right? It's one of the epistles to the people of Corinth. It says, "Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor the idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor greedy drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." That's pretty blatantly to the point. That's pretty blatantly to the point, right? It pretty explicitly says men who have sex with men. Corinthians 6:9 is pretty blatant. So the argument that I literally heard them make sitting in this workshop at high school, this is the argument I heard them make, was that the word in Greek, in the original Greek, for a man who has sex with a man, is also the word for effeminate man. And of course, they immediately jumped out. And that doesn't mean trans people, and that doesn't mean that, men that are effeminate. And they then said, I kid you not, that in ancient Greece, one of the definitions of being effeminate was not fulfilling your responsibility to your wives and children. I kid you not. So they sat there and they said that what this referred to was men who do not feed and take care of their wives and children. And I sat there and I'm just like, are you kidding me? I said, are you kidding me? Right? So, they said that, no, the ancient Greek word for gay just means effeminate man. And one way that a man could be effeminate was if he didn't care for his wife and children. So therefore, this verse simply refers to men who do not care for their wives and children. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, how about, here's a wild thing. Maybe the Bible's wrong. Maybe there are different ways of understanding the world. And I was sitting there, and that's what pissed me off so much, is I was sitting there and these classes were taught by these very, very angsty people. Right? It was all this angsty. Oh my God, how can I be a Christian and be gay? Oh my God. And I'm just like, you don't have to be a Christian. There's all kinds of religions out there. You could be a Buddhist, you could be a Muslim, you could be an atheist, you could be a Christian who doesn't literally believe the Bible. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, like, why are you doing all these leaps and backflips? I just found the entire purpose of the workshop to be very silly. And I'm thinking, like, I just found the whole thing to be very, very silly, because the church didn't even believe in biblical literalism anyway, right? They believed in Darwinian evolution. So they obviously don't believe in Genesis. They don't believe that the earth was created in 6 days. So if you don't believe in biblical literalism, why are you sitting there trying to bend over backwards to twist around what a verse says? You already don't believe that the Bible is literally true. So why are you sitting there? I mean, look, I mean, if the church I had grown up in did believe in biblical literalism, it would make sense that they would, quibble over every word. But it's just like, you already don't literally believe in biblical literalism. So how about we just say, the Bible also says the earth was created in 6 days. We don't believe that. The Bible also says that, that Jacob's donkey spoke to him. We don't believe that. And leave it at that. And I just felt like the whole thing was an exercise in like desperate conformity. Right. And I was very frustrated, because I'm just like, I don't like when people have a block in their mind. I don't like that. Right. I've always somebody who is just, I don't know what it is about me. I'm not a thought conforming person, and I don't like it. Yes, he did. I agree with you, Gavin, about that. He did teach it, but but these people were not young earth creationists. So why would it matter what was meant by Corinthians 6:9? Why are you bending over backwards to reinterpret Corinthians 6:9 to mean something other than what it means, so that I mean, I don't know. I found that to be frustrating. And I remember just sitting there and going, look, if being gay is such a big part of your identity, how about you pick another religion? I mean, or how about you are willing to admit the Bible is not literally true? And I just sat there, and it's like when people are so desperate to believe something that they do huge leaps and backflips to believe it and believe something else. I find that to be very frustrating in many different contexts. I've told you all the story many, many times of the time I got moved to the other side of the room because of my dear friend, who I made cry one day, because I was sitting next to her and we were talking about the drinking of alcohol. And she was a fundamental Baptist, and her grandparents had been Amish. Whole story anyway. But she was a fundamental Baptist. She wore skirts to her ankles every day to school. And I've told this story on these streams many times, because it's a moment that it's one of those moments that frustrates me, right? And I think, Gavin, you can agree with me here, right? My deeply religious friends, Terry, I think you all will sympathize with me, right? And I remember I was sitting in math class, and we were waiting for class to start. We're just chatting. I'm sitting there, and my good friend, or everyone pretty well when you're in a small town, but good friend is not exactly the right words. But this person I knew, we were talking about alcohol. And I said, well, obviously you can't drink until you're 21. However, I said, when I get to be 21, I'm going to drink alcohol because it's legal. And she said, you cannot drink alcohol. It's a sin. And I said to her, if it's a sin, why was Jesus's first miracle turning water into wine? Which I thought was a fairly good argument. And then she said to me, it wasn't wine, it was just grape juice, but they thought it was wine because it was purple. And I said, hold up, there was no way to prevent wine from fermenting in these times. There was no refrigerators. There was no, what do they call that when they, I forget what it's called. She said it wasn't wine, it was grape juice. And I said, no, there was no, what do they call it? Pasteurization, or I don't remember what it's called, but there was no way to keep it from becoming wine in these days. And I said, there's no way this was grape juice because it would have fermented. because there was no way to have grape juice back then. There were no refrigerators. There was no whatever. And I said this, and she started crying. And she just started crying right then. And I felt like, oh shit. And that's the thing. Sometimes it's better to just lose an argument. I should have just said, oh, you're right. You're right. It's a sin. So thanks for pointing that out. But I, being an arrogant young man, of course, wanted to be smart. Stupid me. And so, she says to me, it was actually grape juice. And I said, no, it wasn't. There was no pasteurization back then. There were no refrigerators. It would have fermented. It couldn't have been grape juice. And then she started crying. And of course, then the next day before class starts, the math teacher takes me out in the hallway and says, Caleb, you need to not make fun of other people's religion. I said, I wasn't making fun of her religion. He said, I know what you did. And I had to sit on the other side of the room. And I look back on that moment, and it's like, that's why I was so frustrated by religion, right? Here I am making women cry, right? But it's just like, that's not thinking. Okay. Like, why should that have made her cry? Why? I mean, why did that make her cry? It made her cry because it was so important to her that her church and her religion be right. And I, by making certain logical statements, was pointing to a possible contradictory aspect of their theology. And it was so scary to her to think outside of what she was being told to think. She was so terrified of what I was saying that she just burst into tears. I hate that in any circumstance. Just like I hate that guy sitting there trying to tell me that the Corinthians 6:9 is actually about men who don't care for their wives and children. Why is it so important to people not to think outside of what they're told to think? I don't. I mean, maybe I'm on the spectrum a little bit. I don't know. But I have always found it annoying when people, it's like people are scared to ask certain questions. I think, to be fair, we're all scared to ask certain questions. If you got to know me intimately enough, I bet you could probably get me into a position where there's certain questions I don't want to answer. So who am I to judge, as they say? But I don't like it when I see people engaging in, what did Terry call it earlier? Terry had a name for it. She called it stretching or leap. I don't like that. Right? I don't like it when there's a premise that the conversation takes on and we're terrified of questioning that premise. Right? There's a pretty big assumption the conversation is based on, and we're afraid of questioning that assumption. Right? In the case of, the workshop I'm sitting in where they're talking about Corinthians 6:9, I mean, this guy is going, the premise that the Bible might just not be right is just something he's not willing to explore, which makes no sense in a church that is, one that believes in, in Darwinian evolution, one that, doesn't accept a lot of the Old Testament. I mean, it's like, why can't Corinthians 6:9 also be wrong? I mean, I don't see why is that not discussed? Why can't we just say, whoever wrote the letter to the Corinthians, Paul, had a bigoted view of homosexuality, and we don't agree with that, just like we don't agree with Genesis. Why is that not up for discussion? I find that annoying. Just like I found it annoying on her part that maybe her church believes drinking alcohol is wrong and Jesus had a different view. I mean, if Jesus did perform a miracle to turn water into wine, he obviously did not think people ingesting alcohol was a sin. Right? And maybe her church has a different view, and that's fine. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why are we spending so much time on this question? I don't know. You asked me about liberation theology and woke, and I don't know. I don't know. I will say this, and I talk about this in Where is America Going? I've observed this. This is in chapter 3, I think. They really tried around the time that Donald Trump got elected. I noticed this. Chapter 3. At the time that Donald Trump was elected, they really, really tried to build what they called a religious left. And they went out of their way to advertise it. A Wall Street Journal ran articles, The Rise of the Religious Left, and the New York Times. And they really went out of their way. There's a whole lot of Soros money and foundation money that went to try and create urban hipster churches that would protest for Black Lives Matter and protest for LGBT rights and be woke religious left churches. And it largely failed. Most of those churches dried up in a year or two. Why? Because you can't be fanatical about these ideas. A real religious left would look like John Brown. They don't want that. A real religious left would look like Malcolm X. They don't want that. A real religious left would look very, very different than that. They don't want that. They don't want that. Right? And there was a lot of money that went to trying to create a religious left. Thank you. And it's like the stuff they were paying for is stuff that cannot make people fanatical. Right? People can get very fanatical about religion. Go talk to the Houthis. Go talk to the Ayatollahs of Iran. Go talk to John Brown. But the woke liberation theology stuff, people, they're not going to get excited about that. You know, I mean, the Sandinistas, those are woke liberation theologists. The liberation theology government would be the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. That is, you know, the Sandinista government of Nicaragua has liberation theology in its constitution. I've read you the preamble of the Nicaraguan constitution before. It has liberation Christian theology in it. People are capable of becoming fanatical about various brands. That's a broad brush, Gavin. I mean, you're painting with a very broad brush there, right? Catholicism is not fundamentalism, and many people have been motivated by Catholicism to die, etc. What does progressive even mean, Gavin? That's a whole nother question. You're painting with a very broad brush there, right? Yes, people are motivated by fundamentalism, but people are motivated by other isms too. But the woke Christianity was never able to really catch on, and it won't. It won't. I've noticed in my experience, the places where what you might call woke Christianity catches on the most tends to be in the South. And it tends to be in regions of the country like the South, like rural areas, where it is deeply ingrained in the culture that one should be religious. That going to church on Sunday is something that everyone does. And so people with woke views need a place that they can go on Sunday also. And that's where it tends to catch on. But in places that are very secular, not really. Right? And I noticed that even when I was a kid in the United Church of Christ, the places where the pro-LGBT United Church of Christ was the biggest were places where everybody goes to church on Sunday, and people that are LGBT or people that have left-wing views need a place to go on Sunday also. So there you go. There you go. I am not sure I'm leaving this stream up, y'all. I'm just telling you that. I actually might take this stream down afterwards. Between me getting fired up at the person in the chat earlier and this big long thing about gay Bible verses and all that, this has gotten weird. This has been one of the weirdest streams we've had in a while. every so often there's a stream like this where I'm in a frustrated place and it goes all kinds of places. I am honestly tempted to take this stream down afterwards and just, pretend stream number 750, whatever, didn't happen. But we'll see. I'll talk to people. I'll consult with people. Right? We've gone all over the place tonight. And we still have one more super chat, which is from Gabby. It's worth dreaming. We got to be adults here. Go out of the masses. Go out to the masses. Not easy. Learning all day. Communication is key. Look, part of the way you learn is you make mistakes. There is no question about it. Gavin doesn't mind. All right. Part of the way you learn, leave it up. It was an educational for me. Okay, well, part of the way you learn is you make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. Okay? And especially with doing outreach, especially with recruiting people, you're going to make mistakes. And you're going to get frustrated. And that this is that whole Wallace Waddles thing that I like. It's all about getting toward a higher state of perfection. It's all about adjusting and correcting and getting to a higher state of perfection. And right now we have to go out and make mistakes so we can learn. And there's just no way around it. And it's going to be risky and it's going to be challenging. And some people aren't ready for it. And some people I think will be ready for it. They just need to get to a better spot. But I could say on here that, what I want for all of you, I want you to go all out. I want you to all go out there and make a mistake. So you learn. I want you all to go out there and fail. So after that, you can succeed. Right? And that sounds like an awful thing to say, but there's an element of truth in it, right? That you need to fail so you can succeed. You need to go out and make mistakes so you can learn from your mistakes. And part of what you need to do, and this is where it gets weird, is you need to learn to fail and try again. And there are some people that don't learn to do that. I had somebody I worked with years ago politically, and he went to one job interview. He did one job interview, and he wore the wrong clothes to the interview. And the person interviewing him said, "Oh, the way you're dressed, that's not the way you dress for a job interview." And he came home from the job interview and he's like, "Oh no, I can't do it." And he got all demoralized. I said, "Why don't you just dress differently for your next interview? You're never going to interview at that place again. So your next interview, you dress differently." End of story. Right? And that part of learning to succeed is learning to make a mistake and feel embarrassed and feel shame and then go back again. And then go try again and move on from it. And that's the problem. I will say that there is a certain mindset. And I almost don't want to say I see it among conservatives a lot because in my mind, I associate it with conservatives, but honestly, woke people do this also. Woke people are particularly, it's not a conservative mindset. I just associate it with conservatives because I grew up in a conservative area. But there's a certain mindset that's very widespread in our culture. It is very Victorian. It is very Protestant. It's this attitude that if someone does something wrong, it's because they haven't been harmed enough, right? And that is not the truth, right? If you go to prison and talk to the worst criminals, you will meet people that have been very badly harmed in their lives. And I don't know where people get this, but it's just something that a lot of people, it's just very widespread. People have it in their minds that if someone hurts someone else or someone does something immoral, they do it because no one's been mean enough to them. They've had their life too easy. No one's been mean enough to them. And if people were only mean to this person, then they wouldn't harm anybody. And it's like, that is not how the world works, my friends. Generally, people who hurt other people are people who've been very badly hurt themselves. There's an expression, Hurt people hurt people. And there's also, that whole thing about, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. When people get hurt, they generally do not learn. They just resent being hurt and they hate you. And it perpetuates a cycle of violence, right? And you get this mindset, if we just hurt people enough, then they'll not hurt other people. And it's like, no, doesn't work that way. If you hurt somebody, they're going to resent you for hurting them and they are going to try to hurt you, right? And that's the whole thing about a cycle of violence. And that's what Jesus was always talking about. Turn the other cheek and forgiveness and that whole thing. And it's this, I don't know where people get this. I do know where people get this. It's just very ingrained in our culture. Puritan sadism, yes. And it's this mindset that, the way to get everyone to be nice to each other is to be mean to people, is if somebody does something that we don't like, it's because they haven't been hurt enough. And so we will all hurt them, or we will have the government hurt them or whatever. And it's like, that's just not how things work. It's Odinism. You blame it on Odin. You have to forgive to be free. Well, forgiveness can be for yourself too. Right. That's a whole nother story. But, it's not even, vengeance is an instinct. They talk about vengeance is an instinct of self-preservation, right? It's like your natural response to a perceived threat, is to, and that it's like you're learning to overcome your natural instinct by forgiving and not seeking vengeance. But it's not even the vengeance thing. It's and I heard this growing up. I believed it. A lot of people I grew up around believed it, that, they would see somebody in the world who's harming other people. And they would say, oh, that person has had such a good life. That's why they're harming other people. No, that's not true. Generally, oh, that person, the reason that, that criminal is breaking into people's cars is because no one's ever told them no. No one's ever punished them before. It's like, that is not true. Right? The reason that person, the reason that person swindles people for money, that's because no one ever corrected them. They never learned there's consequences in life. That's just not true. That's just not true. And I guess the main reason that people believe that is because of the fact that it's what you want to believe when you have a desire for vengeance. Because it makes your vengeance make sense, right? If someone's harmed you, you want to harm them. And the only way you can justify harming them is to say, oh, well, this person did it because they haven't been harmed. And what this person needs, if they get harmed by me, then that will cause them to stop harming other people. So it's not just my selfish desire for vengeance. I'm actually doing it for the good of society, blah, 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 blah. I think that's really what it is. I think that's what it is more than anything. But it's a really big problem, right? It's a really big problem. And, people talk about it with cancel culture. And people talk about it with conservatism, with tough on crime. And it manifests itself in a variety of ways. But I will say that the main motivation people have for hurting other people is a desire to hurt other people. And that sounds repetitive, but it's true, right? The main motivation people have for canceling people is because they want to hurt them. The main motivation people have for the death penalty is because they want to kill someone, because they want someone to be killed. The main motivation people have for getting into fistfights with somebody and beating them up is they want to hurt them. And everyone wants to dress it up as something different than that. No, I want for the good of society. I want to do what's right. No. And it's important to be honest about one's motivations. And I think when people are not honest about what motivates them, not even about being honest with other people, but being honest with themselves. When people aren't honest about themselves. There's somebody who criticized me recently for being too emotional. And I looked at this person and I thought, that's funny coming from you, because you're just as emotional as I am. You're just as emotional as I am, except your emotions come out in a very unhealthy way. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. I don't even think that person realizes that. I mean, maybe I get too wrapped up in things sometimes. Maybe I get too fired up. Obviously, I did earlier on this stream. But so does this person. But this person, I don't even think realizes that. And that's sad. It's pretty sad, because this person, they certainly, their emotions come out. Oh, if they're feeling something, but do they know? Do they know? And that's so sad, isn't it? Look, you should know what your own feelings are. You should know what your own emotions are. And in fact, the first step toward having more control is knowing what you actually feel. And I think a lot of the people in this world that we encounter who are very unhealthy, who do very unhealthy things, don't really know how they feel. You've got to look inward in order to go outward. I've said that on these streams before. If you want to interact with the world, you have to interact with yourself. You have to know yourself better in order to know the world better. So on that note, I am going to end this stream, first of all, because it's been almost 4 hours. Second of all, because it's been a wild ride. I'm going to talk to people about whether I should private this or not. Thanks for being here for me, all. Wouldn't have been able to do anything that I do without you. You all are a great community, and I deeply appreciate and deeply love all the appreciation and support that you guys have offered me. It's been a wild night. Next time I do one of these, I'm opening the windows first. Good night, everybody. Good night.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.